4 Weddings and a Baby. Heartwarming friendship fiction. Five Island Cove, Book 6. Written by Jessie Newton. Narrated by Jill Smith. Chapter 27. Shh, Alice said, pushing herself back and forth in the rocking chair as the back door opened and Charlie walked in with his friends. I have the baby. She smiled at the teens as they quieted down and got drinks out of the fridge. AJ looked over at the boys too, and she looked exhausted. Alice had tried to take Asher for her for a couple of hours so she could sleep, but AJ had insisted on coming to Alice's house with her. Charlie handed a can of soda pop to his friend, Tad, and then approached the living room.
Hi, AJ,
he said with a smile.
Mom, can I have $20 to go get those wheels for my skateboard? Remember you said you'd pay for them?
Yes, I remember. Alice tucked the snoozing 1-week-old into the crook of her arm and stood. Good morning, Tad, she said to the other boy. Sam, where's Ray?
He's working,
Tad said.
He doesn't get off until 1.
Good for him, Alice said with a smile. She took her purse out of the cabinet where she kept it and rummaged through it with one hand to find a $20 bill. Asher grunted with the movement, but he didn't open his eyes. Even when he did, they were dark and unfocused, as with most newborns. Here. She finally just pushed her purse toward Charlie. Find it and take it. If they're more than 20, you'll have to fund it.
Okay.
He found the money in a flash, and Alice cocked one eyebrow at him. Who's driving?
Tad,
Charlie said.
Don't worry, Mom. He's a good driver.
I am, Tad said. I'm a lawyer, Alice said. Keep that in mind if you feel like doing something illegal. Even lawyers can't lie for their clients. She grinned at him, glad when Tad chuckled a little bit. Charlie just rolled his eyes, and the boys took their sodas and left. The house quieted again, and Alice opened the fridge. Do you want something to drink, AJ?
No,
she said with a sigh.
I should go. Matt's going to be home for lunch, and he loves to hold Asher too.
Okay, Alice said, but she didn't want to pass over the tiny boy. AJ had only been home for 2 days, as Asher had had some jaundice in the hospital that had kept him for an extra couple of days. AJ and Matt still put him under a light for a little while each day, but Alice could hardly tell the baby needed it. She passed Asher to his mother, catching the look of love in AJ's eyes. She seemed softer all around, but if anything, becoming a mother made her understand her own mother's abandonment of her and her siblings even less.
Thanks for taking him, Alice.
AJ gave her a quick hug. You'll have to let me take him while you stay home, Alice said. I will.
I know you will.
AJ gave her a tired smile.
I'm so attached to him still. Matt says it'll wear off.
She laughed a little and tucked Asher into his car seat.
There you go, my love. Let's go see Daddy, okay?
She hefted the car seat with a groan and gave Alice another smile. Alice walked her to the door and stayed there instead of accompanying her all the way to the car. AJ didn't want to be babied, Alice knew that. So she waved from the doorway and then closed the door behind her. Ginny had gone to work at the ice cream shop, and Charlie would be gone for the afternoon with his friends. Alice faced her office, but she didn't want to work today. Not when the sun was so bright, and Arthur didn't have to be in his office. She called him and said, Me and you, Rocky Ridge, Black Sand Beach, what do you say?
I say I'm grabbing my trunks and my keys right now.
He laughed, and Alice smiled as she leaned against the door jamb that led into her office. At that moment, with all the silence in her house and Arthur's sexy laughter on the other end of the line, and the fact that when she had free time, she wanted to spend it with him, told Alice that she'd fallen in love with Arthur Rice.
Have you eaten?
He asked. No, Alice said quietly. Arthur stayed quiet too, and then he asked,
What's going on?
Alice smiled to herself, simply basking in the feeling. Nothing. I'll tell you when you get here,
I'll be there in 5.
he said, and the call ended. Alice felt like she was moving through quicksand as she walked down the hall and into her bedroom. She changed into her swimming suit and stepped into her cover-up, which really just looked like a white maxi dress. She'd just slipped on her sandals when her doorbell rang. She grabbed her hat as Arthur called,
It's just me, Alice.
I'm in the bedroom, she called back, and she reached up to get her beach bag out of the closet. She heard Arthur, and she knew he'd have questions. Her chest stormed, and tears pricked her eyes. Alice couldn't remember the last time she'd cried, and she told herself it was okay to be emotional about being in love. She just couldn't believe it.
Hey,
He said gently.
I'm coming in.
Come in, she said, her voice breaking. Arthur arrived at her side in a flash, which wasn't hard to do in her house, as small as it was.
What is it?
He whispered.
One of the kids? AJ?
Alice turned and wrapped her arms around him, hoping she moved fast enough that he wouldn't see her glassy eyes. I feel ridiculous,
Why?
he whispered. She clung to him and he to her, and Alice could feel everything in that moment. She only needed a few seconds to tell him, and she did want to tell him. She drew in a deep breath and stepped back. AJ left, and the twins are busy today, and I didn't want to work. She reached up and brushed her hair back out of her face, then let her hand drift down the side of his face. She looked into his dark eyes. My only thought is when I can see you again. And I called, and you seem to want to spend all your free time with me too.
I do.
He whispered as he leaned into her touch. Listening to you laugh, I realized I'm in love with you. Alice smiled, the gesture wobbling a little bit as her eyes burned. I love you, Arthur, and it's just got me a little emotional. Arthur took her face in his hands and leaned toward her.
I love you too.
He kissed her, and Alice liked that he led the action but let her participate in it. He didn't try to rush, but he took his time, really showing her how much he cared about her. When he finally broke the kiss, Alice nearly stood in the closet.
What do you want to do now?
He asked. Go to the beach, she said. I love the black sand beach, and I don't think you've ever been.
I haven't.
Arthur smiled at her and ran his hands through her hair.
I was talking about life in general. Do you want to get married? We could move in together, or just keep doing what we're doing.
Alice smoothed down the collar on his polo. You don't want to just keep doing what we're doing.
No,
He said.
that wouldn't be my first choice.
He backed up, taking Alice with him.
What's your first choice?
Alice knew what she wanted, and she'd already said the hardest words. I'd like to get married. A grin burst onto Arthur's face.
Let's do it then.
He wrapped his arms around her and lifted her off her feet.
Best email I've ever sent.
Alice laughed and kissed him again as he held her up. Maybe we should skip the beach and stay here for a minute. He set her on her feet.
I'll do whatever you want, sweetheart.
He nuzzled her neck.
You're dressed for the beach already.
Alice ran her hands through his thick hair. I want you to meet my dad and Della.
Let's go to Rocky Ridge.
Arthur said. He bent to pick up her floppy hat.
I'd love to meet your dad and stepmother.
We can talk about a real wedding on the way, she said.
I bought a ring.
Arthur admitted, casting her a look out of the corner of his eye. You did? Alice paused in stuffing a towel in her bag. Arthur, you didn't need to do that. I'm fine with this being more casual,
I am too,
he said.
but nothing about how I feel about you is casual. And I know you like diamonds.
Alice wasn't sure if she should be exasperated about the money he'd spent or pleased that he knew her.
I want you to know that I'm serious about you.
He said.
If the diamond is the only way I get to do that, so be it.
Alice faced him again, and she found him holding the diamond. Shock moved through her, and her gaze flickered from the gem to Arthur's face. You have it with you?
You said Black Sand Beach.
He said, grinning.
You've told me how much it meant to you, and I don't know. I just thought.
He shrugged and stepped toward her.
Will you marry me?
Yes, Alice said, her immediate thought of Charlie and Ginny. How would they react to this news? She'd need to talk to them before she told anyone else, which meant she couldn't text this news out. Her hand shook as Arthur slid the ring on her finger, and she kissed him again. We'll tell my dad and Della, but I need to talk to the twins before the news can spread faster than that.
Fine with me,
Arthur whispered.
My mother will be thrilled.
He grinned at her and reached past her to her beach bag.
Let's go. Are you going to text your dad?
Alice looked around for her phone, wondering where she'd put it. Yes, she said. As soon as I find my phone, I'll let him know we're coming and that I have some news for him. Knock, knock, Robin said as she opened AJ's front door. AJ? It's Robin, Mandy, and Jamie. She stepped into the house, noting how completely silent it was. She'd arranged with AJ to come by today, but if AJ was asleep, she could take the girls to the beach. Behind her, Mandy carried lobster and sushi rolls, but those would keep until later. Let me check on her, Robin said, adding, You two wait here. She went further into the house and around the corner to the office. AJ lay on the couch there, and sure enough, she was fast asleep. Her baby slumbered in a playpen, and Robin gestured for Mandy to bring the food. Let's just leave it, she said. They're both asleep. Jamie's face fell because she wanted to see the baby. Things had been hectic at the hospital a couple of weeks ago, and Robin had only got to hold Asher for a couple of minutes. She'd been by AJ's a couple of times since, but the girls wanted to meet the baby too. They'd been spending their Wednesdays on the beach, so all the kids could come too, but AJ hadn't ventured out into the sun with her son yet. So Robin had offered to bring lunch today, and her daughters would get to see the baby, and AJ would get a little break. Mandy unloaded the sushi and put it in the fridge. And Robin kept an eye on Jamie, who stood in the office doorway and peered toward the baby.
AJ?
Someone called, and the door slammed closed. At the same moment, an alarm started ringing in the office. Robin barely knew which way to look, toward Matt, who'd just come in through the front door, or into the office, where AJ was sitting up. Can we stay, Mom? Jamie asked, and Robin waved her off for a moment.
Oh, hey.
Matt said, grinning as he walked further into the house.
I forgot you guys were coming today.
We don't have to stay, Robin said.
Stay,
he said.
I just came by to see if AJ was awake. She sometimes sets her alarm at the wrong AM or PM.
He laughed and went straight into the office.
Oh, she's up.
I set it for AM, she said, rising to embrace him. How did this morning go?
We passed,
he said.
The course opens on August 10th, and if that baby had played things the way he was supposed to, we would have gotten it done before he came.
He grinned, and the two of them laughed. Robin liked watching them, but they also reminded her that she went home to an empty house every day, no matter what. Come get Asher, AJ said. Whoever wants him. I do, Jamie said, practically leaping toward the playpen. She bent over and picked up the baby, who made a cute infant squeaking noise. Hold his head, Robin said. Find a seat, Jamie. I can hold a baby, Mom. She took a seat on the love seat, her attention on the baby boy in her arms. Come eat, Robin said. We brought sushi and lobster rolls.
Oh, bless you,
AJ said.
I've been craving sushi for days, and Matt's kids don't like it. Matt doesn't like it,
Matt said, grinning as he joined them all in the kitchen. Robin laughed with him and then asked him about the golf course on Rocky Ridge.
We're already booked for tea times for the next 3 weeks,
he said.
We're trying to get the steamer from Nantucket to put on a special route to Rocky Ridge instead. Our customers don't want to come to Diamond and then get on another boat and go north again, but they're not sure they want to do it.
Do they even have the ferries? Robin asked.
Oh, they have them,
Matt said, taking 2 lobster rolls.
They just don't want to use them.
Why wouldn't they want to use them? Robin asked. They'd make money on it, wouldn't they? He bit into his lunch while AJ grinned at the sushi. Robin took a sushi roll and a lobster roll, and she put them on a plate for Jamie. After setting that aside, she took one of each for herself, too.
They'd make money, yes,
Matt said.
I don't know what the hang-up is. They've explained it to me, but I don't understand it.
It's because it's not about the boats, AJ said. It's about the manpower required to run the boats. They don't have the people. They have to get insurance on those boats. They'd have to fuel them. You're not bringing them that much business.
They could stop at the Ridge before continuing to Diamond,
Matt argued. Did you propose that to them? Robin asked.
I did,
Matt said with a frown.
I even said we'd increase the fee. Our polls said people would pay it.
He shook his head.
There's something going on there I don't understand.
He filled his mouth with more lobster roll while the storm vibrated in his expression. Thank you for the sushi, AJ said, smiling. Thanks for letting us come hold your baby. Robin smiled at her and picked up her sushi roll. When does Duke come home? AJ asked. Not until September, Robin said. But we're on the final stretch. She put a smile on her face because she didn't like being negative about Duke being gone in front of the girls. They helped her immensely around the house, and Mandy cooked dinner more than half the time these days. Robin had been busier than ever this summer, which had made the time go by faster. Laurel's almost ready for her wedding, she said. We have the food, the flowers, the cake. She's not wearing a dress, and we did our final walkthrough of the venue this week. She smiled at AJ, hoping she didn't notice the topic shift. That's great, she said. I really like Laurel. I do too. Robin liked Laurel a lot. She hoped everything went well with the first delivery at the Cliffside Inn, because while neither she nor Eloise spoke much about it, Robin knew it was a pivotal day. Are you going to the Heritage Fair? She asked next. You two should come. Bring all the kids. We're going on Sunday afternoon. Sunday afternoon? AJ repeated. That's the busiest time. No, the busiest time is Friday night, Mandy said, when all the teens are there. AJ grinned at her, but Mandy barely broke into a smile. Then all those teens get forced into going again with their families on Sunday afternoon. Mandy did smile then, and Robin appreciated her daughter so much. She'd been mature about spending time with Charlie this summer, and she never complained when Robin asked her to do something. She got up and went to work every day, and she didn't blow through her money by buying jewelry and makeup, though she loved both. When do you want to go? Robin asked, refraining from suggesting a time. She had a big event on Saturday, so if AJ chose that day, she'd have to bow out. Mandy and Jamie could still go, though. Sunday morning? AJ suggested. It'll be cooler, and we can leave once the big crowds show up. Sure, Robin said. I can do Sunday morning. Should we invite everyone else? AJ asked. Sure, put it on the text. Robin finished her lobster roll, the creaminess of it making her mouth so happy.
All right, I'm headed back to the course, babe.
Matt leaned over and kissed his wife.
What do you want me to bring home for dinner?
Lisa's making those hand pies, AJ said. She'll be home in a little bit. She just ran down to the coffee shop to do her orientation calls with her team.
Oh, right.
Matt waved goodbye to Robin and added,
Thanks for bringing lunch and checking on my wife.
Of course, Robin said. I'm hoping to get a minute with that baby, too. Good luck, Mandy said. Jamie's going to hog him until you force her to give him up. She looked toward the office, and Robin grinned at her. Don't worry, Mandy, she said. I'll make sure you get to hold him, too. She turned back to AJ. What do you think about Kristen's proposal to the city council about the Seafaring girls? You know what? AJ straightened and left the rest of the sushi in the tray. I think it's a great idea. I think Jean would be amazing in that role, and I think it's a worthwhile program. You didn't when we were kids, Robin said, smiling. What was worthwhile when we were kids? AJ challenged. She shook her head and put the lid on the sushi. Besides, I was really sick back then. Oh, honey, I know. Robin took her into a hug. I wish I'd known then how hard things were for you. I didn't know, and I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry about, AJ said into Robin's shoulder. Even I didn't know how bad I was. She stepped back, her eyes focused on something a bit far away. I guess she'll text after the meeting tonight? I suppose, Robin said. She made it sound like they'd just be bringing it up tonight. She's not sure if they'll vote on it right away. Even if they do, Mandy said, meeting Robin's eye. It seemed like she wouldn't get to decide who ran the program or anything. No, Robin said, putting her arm around her daughter. They'd had Kristen, Jean, and Reuben, and their dogs, over for dinner a few nights ago. Kristen had practiced her proposal, something she'd told the group about at lunch last week. She'd only gone into surface details then, but Robin had gotten the nitty-gritty over fish and chips. I know she's worried about that, Robin said, but she'll have some influence, and I don't think she needs to worry too much about it. She flashed a smile at AJ. Okay, I'm going to go see if I can pry that baby away from my baby. Kelli followed Amy and her girls up the steps to the house where Wayne Proctor lived, feeling like she shouldn't be there. AJ had insisted she come to breakfast, though, and Kelli was no good at telling AJ no. She didn't want to spend this Saturday morning alone, and Shad had gone in for another emergency meeting. She hadn't realized how important he was in the city government, but he was the financial director for the entire town of Five Island Cove. Only the city manager, the assistant city manager, and the mayor sat above him, and he had been taking quite a few afternoons off this summer. Mary, hold the door for Kelli, Amy said to her daughter. She flashed Kelli a smile. Smells like Grandpa has his maple omelet baked. Darcy, go see if he needs this milk out here. Kelli walked past the crated milk bottles, and she'd been contacted about the home milk delivery. She didn't like milk, and with Parker gone and not eating it on his cold cereal, she couldn't remember the last time she'd actually bought milk. Kelli stepped past Mary, who looked mostly like her mother, with a tiny bit of AJ's nose in there. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, the girl said, and Kelli blinked as she looked around the house. It was the same one AJ had lived in growing up, but so much had changed. The shape of the house remained, but even the layout had been altered. The wall between the front living room and the back, where the kitchen sat, had been removed. Light streamed in the huge back windows, reflecting off the newer hardwood floors, new appliances, and comfortable-looking furniture. Wow, Kelli said under her breath. Wayne Proctor had terrified Kelli as a teenager, but now he turned from the stove, a flowery apron tied around his waist. Hey, there's my girls. He laughed as he scooped Darcy into his arms, and she asked him about the milk. Yeah, we should bring that in. I'll get it, Kelli said. But Amy's husband, Donovan, entered the house with the crate in his arms. Where's AJ? Amy asked, stepping over to her dad and giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. She's here, right?
They're all out back,
Wayne said.
She wanted to show Matt and his kids the deck and the beach.
Wayne looked past Amy to Kelli.
My goodness, it's Kelli Watkins. I hear congratulations are in order for you.
He wore a smile the size of a yacht, and he came toward her with a spatula in his hand.
Getting married soon, I hear?
Yes, Kelli said, plenty surprised as Wayne hugged her.
When's the big day?
We haven't actually set a date yet, Kelli said, feeling such a difference inside Wayne. He stepped back, and she loved this real-life example that people could change. They could take a life that seemed so hopeless and turn it around completely. She grinned at him as he stepped back. It's so good to see you.
How's your mom?
He asked.
AJ said she's engaged too.
Yeah, Kelli nodded. She's good. They don't have a date either. Well, actually, I think they're aiming for Thanksgiving. That's when my sisters can come. Kelli didn't want to wait that long. What she was waiting for to set a date, she wasn't sure. Something was holding her back, as she hadn't even asked Robin to plan the wedding yet. She'd talked to Robin about it, who said she'd clear her schedule and give Kelli the event she wanted, even if the guest list wouldn't top 15. The back door opened, and AJ entered with her husband right behind her. Matt carried the baby, and his adult children filed in behind him. The house felt really full after that, and Kelli thrived on the energy of AJ's family. She'd always loved being anywhere but at her house growing up, and she and AJ had often holed up under the back deck here at her house, as it stood several feet off the ground and offered a great view of the ocean. AJ reached her and hugged her, saying, I'm glad you came, Cal. Me too, Kelli said, embracing her back. You look great. Asher's going almost 6 hours at night now, AJ said, pulling back to beam at Matt and her son. Lisa will get up and give him his morning bottle, and she lets me sleep for a few more hours. Kelli watched as Matt's sons joked with Wayne, and AJ said, It's amazing how much one summer can change things, isn't it? Oh, yeah, Kelli said, thinking of last summer. She'd left the Cove in June, and by the end of the summer, she'd decided to move permanently back to Five Island Cove. This summer, she'd started dating a man and gotten engaged to him. Justin actually said he was sorry, and that he misjudged me, AJ said quietly. He said he can see that I'm perfect for Matt, and that he's just glad his dad is back to who he used to be. Wow, Kelli said. Yeah. AJ sighed and leaned her head against Kelly's shoulder. How's Parker? You don't say much about him. He's good, Kelli said. He hasn't used our safe word once this summer, and every time I talk to him, he seems upbeat and happy. She smiled at the people in front of her. Older. His voice is changing a little already. Only a couple more weeks until you get him back. Yeah, Kelli said. On the same day Eloise is getting that delivery. She looked at AJ. Are you worried about that? I don't know if I should be or not, she admitted. Laurel doesn't seem to be, and honestly, neither does Elle. When is Laurel ever ruffled by anything, though? Kelli asked, grinning at AJ. That woman is like a rock. AJ started to giggle. She is, right? Except when she's with Paul. She melts a little then. Yep, AJ agreed. He's perfect for her. Her baby started to cry, and AJ stepped away from Kelli to attend to him. Kelli sat down to a yummy maple bread pudding breakfast, and though she didn't share blood with anyone in the room, it was exactly where she was supposed to be. She couldn't wait to see Shad again, though, and she called her son on the way back to her twin home just to feel connected to him, too. August 11th. The day she'd pick up Parker in New Jersey couldn't come fast enough. Chapter 28. Eloise didn't need a hidden camera. The Cliffside Inn had security cameras on the front door, the back door, the patio, and the foyer. That didn't include the storage room, but part of the consumables delivery service offered unpacking, so she wouldn't be in there anyway. "Are you sure?" Laurel asked. "You could go in and pretend like you didn't know, help put things away."
Or show him where to put things away,
Aaron said. Eloise looked at her husband, wishing he hadn't made the trip to Sanctuary that day. At the same time, knowing that he lurked right here in the apartment behind the inn comforted her. "What will it look like?" she asked, already confused by the array of items on the kitchen table. She'd given Marge the day off and asked to use her suite. Marge had agreed and gone to Pearl Island to visit her sister, so she shouldn't be interrupting them. "It's actually a pair of glasses," Laurel said, reaching into a box and pulling out a case. "Whatever you look at, we'll see." "Oh, well, I can wear glasses." Eloise looked at Aaron, who nodded. They'd left the girls with Robin and Alice and their kids, all of them planning a trip to the beach that morning. Kelli had flown to New Jersey last night to pick up Parker today, and they'd both be home by nightfall. Everyone on the group text wanted information from Eloise or Laurel the moment they had it. Eloise knew Laurel wouldn't tell them anything, especially if it pertained to the case. Eloise herself had sworn up and down and even signed an agreement that she wouldn't either. "Okay," Laurel said, slipping the glasses onto Eloise's face. She adjusted them, and Laurel added, "Let's see if they've picked up the Wi-Fi." She tapped on the laptop she'd already set up, and when she grinned, Eloise assumed everything was working how she wanted it to. Eloise drew in a breath and smoothed her hands down her blouse. She wore the same thing she always wore to work. She'd left the house at the same time. She'd checked out her customers the way Marge usually did. She'd ordered food for that night, since her cook would be gone. She'd insisted the delivery come between noon and 2 p.m., as that was her slow time in the lobby and at the front podium. She didn't want to be dealing with check-in or check-out while the delivery boy was there. She wasn't even sure it would be a boy. Marilyn Benson herself could bring the toiletries for all Eloise knew.
"All right, love,"
Aaron said. He got up from the couch and took her into his arms.
"You're fine. We're right here, and we can see and hear everything."
His voice reverberated on Laurel's computer, and she muted it.
"There's not going to be any snakes in the box, so you have nothing to be afraid of."
He smiled at her, and Eloise put her hands on his chest, focusing her attention there so he couldn't see how nervous she was. "Look who's being all calm this time," she murmured, "and a lot of people are afraid of snakes." He chuckled and hugged her, and then he said,
"All right, El. Let's see what happens."
Eloise nodded, locked eyes with Laurel, then Tom, who stood near the door of the suite, and she left. A few people played in the pool, and she heard evidence of a volleyball game going on down on the lower terrace. She ignored all of that and went inside the inn, down the hall, and stopped to check something at the podium. The clock had barely ticked to noon, and her stomach roared at her to eat something. She still hadn't figured out what to do with her leftovers, and she'd spoken with her night janitor about taking whatever he wanted. When she'd met with Nick, she'd learned that yes, his wife had lost her job. They didn't have much to live on, and they were caring for their 5-year-old granddaughter. Once Eloise had heard that, she'd told him to take whatever he found in the fridge at night that had clearly been served to guests. They wouldn't re-serve it, as they legally couldn't, and Eloise had been thinking about donating it. Nick had been so grateful, and Eloise had crossed off the idea of finding a place to donate the food from her never-ending to-do list. In all honesty, she wanted this sting to be over too. It felt like a weight had been hanging over her head for a month, just waiting to drop. She wanted to see what came in the delivery, so Laurel could get her man, or in this case, woman, and move on. She could focus on her and Paul and their wedding that was less than a month away now. Eloise simply wanted everything to go back to normal. Thankfully, she didn't have to wait long for someone to walk through the door. The woman carried a large box that seemed to cause her trouble, and she dropped it on the floor only a few feet inside the door. "Whew," she said, wiping her hand across her forehead. She grinned at Eloise as if they were old pals and said, "I'm Hillary Henson. I have a delivery for you?" She held out her clipboard, and Eloise was a little surprised it wasn't electronic. "From Benson Beauty?" "Right," Eloise said, reaching for the clipboard. The woman stood about as tall as Eloise, so not much more than 5'3", if that. She weighed probably half as much as Eloise, so she gained a bit of confidence that she could overpower her should it come to that. She balked at the thought, her mind spinning over a possible physical altercation. That wouldn't happen, would it? "And you unpack it for me?" she asked. "Gold tier members get the unpacking," the woman said. Eloise glanced up and took in the name tag on her shirt. Hillary was spelled with 2 L's, which Eloise found interesting. "I am gold tier," she said. "Are you?" Hillary consulted the clipboard and even flipped a page. "Huh, okay. Sorry, I didn't realize." She looked at the box on the floor, and Eloise realized she would have left it there had she not mentioned the gold tier. "Show me where you want this. I'll get it put away for you." "I've got a wall of cupboards right back there." Eloise wasn't going to touch that box. Number 1, Aaron, Tom, and Laurel had told her not to. Number 2, she was paying an enormous amount of money for the gold tier, an amount she would have never agreed to if the situation were different. She would have blown off Marilyn's proposal and never gone to another women in business meeting again. She led the way past the podium, ignoring Hillary's grunt and groan, and into the storage room off the back of the inn. Hillary huffed and puffed as she brought the box back. She put it on the counter and pulled a box cutter from her back pocket. She wore a navy blue uniform from head to toe, almost like the scrubs a nurse would wear in the hospital. Eloise kept out of arm's reach of her, proud of herself for doing so. Aaron would be happy about that too. She opened the far cupboard and looked inside. "This is where the soap goes. Shampoo and conditioner in this one." She kept opening cupboards and saying what was in them as Hillary began lifting boxes of soaps, body and hand, from the box. "Oh, these are so much nicer than what you've been ordering," Hillary said. "You've been going through hotel amenities?" She looked at Eloise with surprise, as if no one in their right mind would order from the largest hotel supply company in the country. "Yes," Eloise said simply. "How are your products better?" she asked. "Our bottles are eco-friendly, for one," Hillary started, and Eloise wanted her to stop talking immediately. She just kept going on until she reached the last item in the box. "That's it," she said, and Eloise's heart fell all the way to the floor. She'd been standing back by the far wall while Hillary got the job done, and she'd seen everything the woman had removed from the box and put on the shelves. None of it resembled drugs in any way, shape, or form. "Wait," Hillary said. "You've got an extra case of hand soap." She actually stepped back from the cupboard and counted. "Yeah, there's 3, and on a thrice-monthly delivery system, you only get 2. She reached for the closest box, but Eloise darted forward. "I'm almost out of it," she said. "Could you leave it and just bring me 1 next time?" "No," Hillary said, and not in a very friendly voice either. "We do the tiers and the monthly deliveries a certain way, so it's easy to pick and pack. You'll still get 2 next time because it's too hard to do special orders." "I'll pay for it then," Eloise said, "a la carte." "We don't do a la carte." Hillary gave her a smile that wasn't really a smile and plucked the case of hand soap from the shelf. She picked up the bigger box and moved to step past Eloise. "She's taking that case with her," she whispered, not quite sure where the camera or mic was in the glasses. She pushed them up on her face. "What if that's the one with something in it?" She wasn't wearing an earpiece, and she had no way of communicating with anyone in the suite. She glanced that way, saw no one, and then started down the hall after Hillary.
Will you come every time? She asked, nearly yelling at the woman. Or will I have to show a different person where to put things next time? Hillary turned back to her, the large box flapping from her hand. Eloise could see all the way inside it, and she froze at the stamped logo she saw there. Cove Creations. It's called Cove Creations, Polly Baldwin had said. We do everything from banners to billboards to boxes. Where did you get that box? Eloise asked, her throat so dry. Hillary said, It'll be me every time, ma'am, right over the top of her, but she dropped her eyes to the box in her hand. She looked back at Eloise, obviously confused. I need some big boxes like that, she said. I'm moving soon, and everything I have only holds bottles of mini shampoo. She forced a laugh through her throat, catching movement on the lawn behind Hillary. Someone in a black uniform, and Eloise yanked her eyes back to Hillary's. Could I keep that one? She looked at it again. Sure, I guess. I don't know where we get them. She stepped forward and put the box on the ground a few feet from Eloise. Do you do the picking and packing yourself? Eloise asked, watching someone come up the front steps behind Hillary. No, Hillary said. It's done at the warehouse. I just pick up the boxes in the morning and deliver them. Eloise nodded as if she understood their system. Is it the consumables warehouse? Hillary frowned. I don't know, ma'am. I really need to go. I have more deliveries to make. She turned to leave, but she came chest to chest with Laurel Baker. Detective Laurel Baker. She said, You're going to need to call in to get someone else to do your deliveries. She held up her badge and indicated Tom, who'd stepped into the inn and now stood beside her. My partner and I have a few questions for you. Eloise grabbed the box and stepped backward. She smelled Aaron before she knew he was there, and she turned to find him in the back of the inn, where Hillary had just put away all of the boxes. He had 2 of his canine cops with him, and all 3 of them wore rubber gloves as they started removing the new items and letting the dogs smell them. Aaron, Eloise said, hurrying toward him. Have them look at this. Look at this. She shoved the box at him. What is it? He frowned down at the empty box. One of the German shepherds barked, the sound so loud in the small space. Eloise flinched, and she looked past him to where the dog had alerted on the case of hand soap that had been next to the one Hillary had taken. The officer turned it over, and the same stamped logo sat on the bottom of it that beamed out at them from the inside of the larger box. That box says Cove Creations on it, Eloise hissed at Aaron, pointing. So does this one. Do you know who owns Cove Creations? No, who? Aaron searched her face, and Eloise's pulse moved so fast she thought her heart would explode. Polly Baldwin.
Chapter 29. Laurel did wear an earpiece, and she heard everything the chief and his canine officers said. Where's the warehouse where you pick up your deliveries? She asked, notebook out and pen at the ready. It's on Diamond, Hillary said. She'd started with attitude, but she'd calmed down once Tom had said they could talk on the lawn for a few minutes, in the shade, or they could get on back to the station and chat there. Down by the shipping yard. Tons of warehouses down there. It's 12B. 12B, Laurel repeated, writing it down. You never go inside? My deliveries are brought out onto the dock, loaded up by Benson beauty workers. I sign a paper, I leave. So you own the delivery van? Yes, Hillary said. I deliver anything anyone contracts me to.
Primarily Benson beauty products, though, right?
Tom asked.
They partner with you exclusively?
He held up his phone.
Says so right here on your website.
Yes, Hillary said slowly, her eyes rounding, though he pulled his phone back so only he could see it. I deliver for them 3 days a week, to about a third of the hotels in the Cove. Tuesdays, I come to Sanctuary. I've got the Beachfront Bay Hotel, and now Cliffside. Everyone wants their delivery when it's not check-in or check-out. Makes timing difficult. I bet, Laurel said, with as much sympathy as she could muster. She took Tom's phone as he offered it to her. She gasped, her mind racing in a contest with her pulse suddenly. "What?" Hillary asked.
How do you know Marilyn Benson?
Tom asked, because Laurel still had a vice grip on his phone and was staring at the two of them, both smiling, on Hillary's delivery website. "She owns Benson Beauty," Hillary said, frowning.
That's the only way?
He pressed. "And she's—" Hillary exhaled and looked north, her expression troubled and dark. "She's my mother, okay?" Tom took his phone back from Laurel, who thought she should be writing something down, but she didn't know what. Laurel blinked, trying to formulate her next question. In her ear, she heard that the drug dogs had alerted on something. They wanted the box Hillary had taken. It sat on the top step on the porch, and Laurel reached up and pressed the button on her radio. 10-4 on that item. It's on the top step for you." She focused on Hillary again, who turned and looked over her shoulder. "What's in the box, Hillary?" she asked. The other woman spun back to her, pure fear in her eyes. "Hand soap," she said. "Yeah, I don't think so," Laurel said. "See, I've got drug dogs here, and they've already scented something on the toiletries you put in the cupboards. Tell me what I'm going to find in that box. Is it dangerous for my guys to open it? Are my dogs going to start barking when they come outside?" One of them did emerge from the inn, and Laurel held up her hand. His handler yipped at him, and the dog sat. She put her arm around Hillary and turned her around. "There they are. If that dog even so much as whimpers, I know there's drugs in there. If my dog gets hurt, that's assault on a police officer. If my guys get hurt when they open that box, same thing." She kept her voice low and her mouth close to Hillary's ear. "So you better tell me right now what's going to happen and if there's any reason at all we shouldn't open that box." Hillary started to cry, and that caused Laurel's heart to bleed a little bit. She told herself callous detectives didn't cry when they caught their criminals. Perhaps she wasn't so calloused yet. Perhaps she wasn't cut out for this job. "He's going to bark," Hillary said. "That's all I'm saying without my lawyer." Laurel reached for her handcuffs and held them up. The canine officer edged his dog forward, the German shepherd eager to work. He got within a foot of the box and barked. His handler moved him closer, and the dog started barking and barking and barking.
Is it coke or meth?
Tom asked. "I don't know," Hillary said. "How did you know which box to take?" Laurel asked. "It's marked," Hillary said. "Not every shipment has a marked box, but the ones that do I take back."
Take them back where?
Tom asked. Hillary cleared her throat. "I want a lawyer." "I'm going to put these on you for your own safety," Laurel said, stepping in front of her while the canine officer backed his dog away. The second one came out, and they had their second dog positively ID the box for drugs. Once he'd stopped barking, Laurel said, "You're under arrest until we get to the bottom of where those drugs came from. You have the right to remain silent." An hour later, Laurel stood in the evidence warehouse, Tom at her side, both canine officers there, and Chief Sherman pacing the length of one of the stainless steel tables. Tom sliced open the top of the box, which bore no markings at all. Not on the top, not on the sides, not on the bottom, nowhere. Hillary had said it was marked, but if that was true, none of the cops could see how or where. The chief picked up one of the other boxes that had been in the shipment too and turned it over.
This one has a stamp on it.
Laurel ignored him because Tom had opened the flaps on the box. She leaned closer to see what was inside. "Dear Lord in heaven," she whispered. Bags of methamphetamine sat there, not a bottle of soap in sight. Relief spread through her faster than wildfire on dry brush, and she honestly felt like slumping to the ground and sobbing. If Paul had been there, she'd have clung to him and bawled like a baby.
This one has a stamp on it too.
the chief said, and Laurel looked past Tom, who was now poking back the plastic in the box with the tip of a pen. He said something to the canine officers, who converged on the boxes to weigh the drugs. "What are you going on about?" she asked the chief. He held up a box.
"This one has a stamp on it."
He indicated all the boxes.
"They all do."
He nodded down to the one where the first zippered bag of meth was being removed.
"That one doesn't, so it's marked by not being marked."
Laurel picked up one of the boxes and looked at the bottom of it. Sure enough, a deep, dark stamp sat there, curling letters that spelled out Cove Creations. She read the name aloud. "It's not Benson Beauty." She met the chief's eyes, and oh, he had something brewing there.
"Eloise said it's Polly Baldwin's company,"
he said under his breath.
"We had them over for dinner a few weeks ago, and apparently Polly told her all about it. Billboards, banners, and—"
He lifted the box.
"Boxes."
She searched his face, too many thoughts filling her mind to seize onto any one of them. "Do you think... Nathan?"
"I don't know what to think." "I think this better be handled delicately,"
Tom said, and Laurel jumped, as she hadn't realized he'd come up beside her.
"Delicately?"
Aaron growled, his fists balling at his sides.
"He's the blasted city manager. He was in my office 3 weeks ago. Oh, no. No, no, no."
He ran his hands through his hair and paced away. Laurel exchanged a glance with Tom. "What?" she asked, as she could definitely handle the chief with a softer pair of gloves than Tom.
"I told him about the case,"
Aaron said, spinning back to her and Tom.
"That's what got him out of my office."
"What do you mean?" Laurel asked, frowning.
"Remember how I was late to the women in business meeting because Nathan showed up? He just wanted to shoot the breeze about nothing, so I started telling him about some of our cases. He doesn't really care, but it does make him feel important. I know how to play to Nathan Baldwin."
"Okay," Laurel said slowly.
"The moment I mentioned this case, he jumped to his feet and said he'd just gotten an important text. He had to head back to his office. I was so relieved, I didn't think anything of it." "What are you thinking of it now?"
Tom asked.
"You think he knows about the drugs his wife is peddling?"
"No," Laurel said, keeping her eyes on the chief's. She'd always been able to read him very well. "He thinks Nathan's peddling the drugs, using his wife's company." She faced Tom, her chest seizing over and over with every beat of her heart. "We need an appointment with the city manager, Tom." Laurel swiped away the call from Paul. She quickly tapped out a text that she'd call him later, and she looked up as Tom came to a stop in front of City Hall. "I have a bad feeling about this," she said, shoving her phone in her pocket. She wanted this drug case solved and done before the wedding. She had 3 weeks to go, and the paperwork alone on the 10 pounds of meth they'd found that morning would eat up her free time between now and then. And that was just one box in one delivery, Laurel thought. Tom had not gotten out of the car yet, and Laurel wasn't going to move until he did.
"You were right,"
he said with a sigh.
"This is big. This is the kind of story that breaks the trust of a small town like ours. No one will believe it, and people will be afraid."
"I know," Laurel whispered. "What do we do, though?"
"At least it's not the mayor,"
Tom said with another sigh.
"Can you imagine?"
"But Nathan Baldwin's office is right next door to the mayor's. He's friends with the chief." She didn't want to say the next part, so she just thought it. Nathan Baldwin lived next door to Arthur Rice. He golfed at Matt's course. Shad Webb's office sat on the other side of Nathan's, and Laurel knew through Kelli that they'd been having a lot of weekend meetings. Could Shad be in on the drug ring, too? Did Matt look the other way for the city manager? Did his father? Had Arthur Rice ever seen him moving boxes out of the house late at night, bringing in a lot of packages at odd hours? How could he have done this all these months without anyone knowing? Even if they didn't know, Laurel believed there would have been signs. They'd all simply chosen to look the other way. She'd spent so much of her life looking the other way, and she wasn't going to do that anymore. Oh no, she was not. She got out of the car first, Tom following her this time.
Laurel! Laurel!
He called.
We have to time this right. Wait, would you?
She slowed and stopped. How long does it take them to secure the warehouse?
We can't have Marilyn or his wife tipping him off,
Tom said.
Wait, he's the kingpin, detective. You take down the pawns first, then go after him.
She nodded and waited. Minutes ticked by as they stood out in front of City Hall, with every available officer in Five Island Cove converging on the warehouses by the loading dock, getting the other city officials out of their offices, bringing in hotel owners, as well as any acquaintances of Nathan Baldwin. It was practically the whole blasted island. Laurel hadn't said a word to her friends, and her stomach writhed. They'd be livid with her, as Matt and his father were definitely being brought in. Eloise would need to appear at the station. Arthur was getting contacted. Shad was probably already with a couple of police officers.
Guess who owns Marilyn's warehouse?
Tom asked, holding up his phone. Laurel read the text quickly. City records show Nathan Baldwin as owner of the warehouse 12B. One of their narcotics cops had texted.
So, we've got him on having drugs at a property he owns or rents.
Possession, Laurel murmured. Finally, a bleep came through the radio, and Laurel heard,
City Hall is clean, you're free to go in.
Unit 5-2, we're finishing up at the warehouse, someone else said. All suspects in custody, phones removed. Once all the reports had come in that everyone else, all the other players in the game, had been secured, Tom nodded.
It's time.
She kept her temper in check as they went through security, as they rode the elevator to the 5th floor, as she marched down the hall and right past his secretary's empty desk to his office. Nathan Baldwin? She asked, entering the office while pulling out her badge. The man stood with a golf club in his hand, and he turned toward her, surprised. Detective Laurel Baker. Can you put down the club, please? Nathan did as she asked, his brow furrowing.
What's going on?
We have a few questions, Laurel said. Can we sit? Tom flashed his badge too, closed the door behind him, and locked it. Nathan went around his desk and sat down. Laurel could barely contain herself to a chair, but she managed it by perching on the very edge. Your wife owns Cove Creations, right? She asked.
Yes,
he said, still obviously confused.
Has something happened to her?
No, sir, Laurel said crisply. Do you know who she sells her boxes to?
Boxes?
He repeated.
She doesn't sell boxes.
Tom swiped on his phone and held it up for Nathan.
That's not one of hers?
Nathan peered at the photo.
Obviously it is.
He looked at Laurel and then Tom, keeping his eyes there.
What's going on?
Are you bringing drugs into the cove? Laurel blurted out, tired of the cat-and-mouse game. Beside her, even Tom gasped.
Of course not,
Nathan said, but he laughed afterward, and it sounded nervous. Laurel sensed the lie, tasted it, and she leaned toward him, feeling dangerous and nearly out of control. Sir, I was held captive by my own husband and forced into things you know nothing about. I can sense a lie from a mile away, and you, sir, just lied to me.
Officer Baker,
Tom said, but Laurel held up her hand. Nathan Baldwin looked like a caged alley cat, and Laurel knew his claws were about to come out. She didn't care. She actually craved the fight this time. How long have you been bringing drugs into the cove, using your wife's stamp to mark the boxes after they'd left her warehouse, and distributing them through Marilyn Benson's beauty company?
Marilyn Benson?
Nathan said, his expression taking on some of his normal swagger.
There's the person you should be after, or that police chief of yours. All he does is look the other way.
He scoffed and then laughed again.
Everyone does. Shad Webb, Athena Cruz, even Bertha out there. Heck, everyone looks the other way, even my own neighbors.
What are you saying, sir? Laurel asked, glancing at Tom. He had his tape recorder out and running, and Laurel was glad for that. Politicians talked in such circles.
What evidence do you have that I'm the one bringing in the drugs?
Nathan challenged.
Am I under arrest? No, sir,
Tom said quickly, though they could easily arrest Nathan on possession, as he owned the warehouse where drugs had been found.
Then I'm done talking.
Nathan stood and buttoned his jacket.
If you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the mayor.
To go over your resignation? Laurel asked, standing too. This isn't over. You can't just walk away.
Unless you're going to arrest me, yes, I can.
He looked right into her eyes, and Laurel blinked, sure she'd see her ex-husband glaring back at her when she focused on Nathan again. He did appear, but on the next blink, Nathan was back. Nathan Baldwin, she said, taking out her handcuffs for the second time that day. You're under arrest for possession of a Class B drug with the intent to sell or distribute that drug. She clipped the first cuff around his wrist and stepped behind him. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used.
This is preposterous,
Nathan bellowed, trying to rip his remaining arm free. Tom stepped to Laurel's side, and together they got him cuffed and walking toward the door while Laurel continued to read him his Miranda rights. Chapter 30. You're where? AJ asked, sitting up as Matt's words sank into her head. Jail? She met Lisa's eyes, hers suddenly as shocked as AJ felt. Slow down, babe. Slow down. What's going on?
They brought me in for questioning,
Matt said.
They have 24 hours to arrest me, and they're going to keep me here.
His voice grew softer.
Laurel is everywhere, AJ. There's not enough cops to do all the interviews, and there's over a dozen of us here.
Laurel?
She arrested Nathan Baldwin,
Matt said, his voice still buried under his breath.
He says my dad and I are part of his drug ring.
What? AJ got to her feet. I'm coming down there.
You can't come down here,
Matt said.
No way. Stay with the kids. I'm fine.
They're going to keep you in jail overnight. Hysteria crept into her voice, and she honestly didn't know which way to look. For nothing. I can talk to Laurel.
I don't think so, babe,
he said.
Shad's here too. The mayor, Greg Sherman, they even put Aaron in a holding room down at the end of the hall by himself.
AJ turned in a full circle, not sure what to do next. You're kidding. Aaron?
Nathan is naming everyone,
Matt said.
It's a lot for them to sort out, but I'm sure they will.
Laurel knows you, she said. She knows you're not smuggling drugs into the cove through the golf course. The very idea was laughable, though AJ had been a little worried when Laurel and her partner had interviewed Matt and Yancey earlier that summer.
They can only keep us for 24 hours,
he said.
I just wanted you to know and not to worry.
Not to worry? AJ couldn't even comprehend that. The back door opened, and Justin and Derek walked in. They wore horrified looks on their faces, and AJ wanted to fold them into a hug and tell them everything would be all right. Somehow, she'd make everything all right. Your kids just got home.
They watched us get taken away,
Matt said.
Me and Dad. The cops said they had to stay at the golf course for another hour, and they'd let them go once the threat had been contained.
Threat?
Is that Dad?
Justin asked. AJ nodded and handed the phone to him.
Dad?
He asked.
Are you all right?
She paced while Justin, Derek, and Lisa all spoke to Matt. Once she got the device back, she said, I love you, Matt. Tell me you'll be home tomorrow night.
I'll be home tomorrow night, my Ava Jane,
he said.
Take care of the kids for me, would you?
Yes, she whispered.
I love you,
he said, and the call ended.
Numbness spread through AJ. She wanted to throw her phone through the window and rage into the cheery, summery sky outside. How could Laurel do this to her? Bitterness coursed through her, and AJ stabbed at her phone, trying to get to Laurel's name. She called the woman, but of course she didn't answer. AJ screamed as tears started to flow down her face. Lisa took her phone and said, "Ava Jane, look at me." She did, and she started to calm instantly. "This isn't going to help, Dad." "You're right." She opened her arms and drew Lisa into a hug. She gestured for Justin and Derek to come join in, and they did. The four of them stood there, breathing in and out and holding one another. "It's going to be okay," AJ said after a few moments. "Your dad is not guilty, and he'll be home tomorrow night. He doesn't want us to panic, so we're not going to." Asher began to whine in the office, and AJ went to get him. With the baby in her arms, she could see Matt so clearly in his face, the shape of his forehead, his chin, even the way his voice sounded. "Daddy's going to be home tomorrow," she said softly to her son. "It's okay, baby. It's all going to be okay." She didn't know how, but AJ believed that the mess happening at the police station would get sorted and Matt would come home. She had to believe that, or her anger would eat her alive, and all she'd be able to do was think about all the nasty things she wanted to say to Laurel Baker.
"I don't understand," Alice said as she folded up her beach chair. "Why are we leaving?" She looked at Robin, who'd actually started to cry. "Who was on the phone?" "Elle," Robin said, stuffing things into bags in the most unorganized fashion. "They found drugs in the shipment to the inn. They made an arrest there. She obviously couldn't say anything to us, so she didn't. Except now they've gone to the inn to get her too. Or they did. Something." Robin wiped her face, and Alice turned back to the water and called, "Charlie, Ginny, we have to go." She wanted to call Arthur, because he could come sit with the kids and watch movies while she went to the police station to help Eloise. The twins would be fine home alone together, too, but since Robin literally never cried, Alice's anxiety had shot toward the moon. "Come on, girls," Robin said. "You'll be staying with me tonight." "Why?" Billy asked, rubbing a towel through her hair. "Where's Dad and Elle?" "They're tied up at the station," Robin said, wiping her face. "They're not going to be home tonight." Alice met Robin's eye. "They're not?" "There is something huge going down," Robin said, shouldering her bag. "Get your things, girls, and follow me. I'll be right back for anything we can't carry." She stepped away from Aaron's kids, and Alice went with her. "Talk to me," Alice muttered. "Eloise isn't under arrest, but she was escorted from the inn by a pair of cops. Aaron's been detained in a room by himself. They won't let her see him. Laurel's case went all the way to Nathan Baldwin." Alice pulled in a breath. "Wow. You're okay with the girls?" "Yes," Robin said. "I'll go to the station," Alice said. "I'm an attorney. I should be able to talk to Eloise and Aaron." The tension in her chest solidified, and Alice's lawyer skin slid easily into place. She'd trained for this, and in fact, she lived to make sure her clients got fair treatment. The twins caught up to her, both of them panting.
"What's the rush?"
Charlie asked.
"You just left us back there."
"I have to get to the police station," Alice said. "Eloise and Aaron need me." She met her son's eye. "I'm going to send you two in a rideshare, and you're going to go home and stay there. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Ginny said for both of them. "I'll send Arthur to stay with you," Alice said. "It sounds like things are a real mess at the station." She'd told the twins about her engagement to Arthur Rice. She hadn't mentioned it to Robin yet, and her eyes flitted in that direction. She didn't want to tell Robin that she didn't want a huge wedding. However, if she didn't talk to her soon, Robin's feelings would be hurt. Alice looked at her phone, praying for a message from Arthur. She had none. She tapped to call a rideshare while Robin loaded all of their beach things in the back of her van and headed back out onto the sand. 5 minutes, she said. Put your things in the van. We'll sort them out later. While Charlie and Ginny did that, Alice followed Robin, jogging the last few steps to where they'd set up for the day. Hey, she said, out of breath. I know it's not a great time, but I have to tell you something. Robin looked up, her bright blue eyes almost clouded with her emotion. What is it? Arthur and I are engaged, Alice said, unable to contain her smile. I haven't told anyone because, well, I don't want it to be a big deal. She hooked her thumb over her shoulder. The twins know. We told my dad and Della, as well as Arthur's mother. I just haven't told anyone else. Robin's eyes widened, and she dropped the towels she'd been picking up. She grabbed onto Alice and held her tightly. Congratulations! I'd hire you, Robin. You're my best friend, and I love you. But honestly, I don't want the type of wedding you do. Robin stepped back, those electric blue eyes searching Alice's face now. What do you want? Honestly? Alice looked up into the sky, wishing this day didn't hold so much tension. I want a backyard ceremony with my friends and family. I'll wear one of my expensive dresses from the Hamptons, but I don't need a new one. Then I want to go inside and have a huge spread of food set out on the counter, and I want to eat. That's it. Even as she spoke, she could see where she wanted all of this to happen. Your house would be perfect. What? Robin asked, scoffing. You're kidding. I'm not, Alice said. You have that huge patio. We could put tables out there. Heck, you already have that picnic table that seats all of us. You have a big island. So we'll put out all the food. I'll buy it, of course. No one should cook on their wedding day. She grinned, her tongue rushing ahead now. And we'll chit-chat before the ceremony. Go get that done under those amazing trees you have, and then we'll eat. Done. Oh my word, you're serious? Dead serious, Alice said, grinning. Don't think about it now. You get home and take care of the girls. I'll go to the station. Your twins could come to my house, Robin said. Mandy's fine with Charlie. I know, Alice said. She's such an amazing girl, Robin. She bent to get the towels and toys Aaron's girls couldn't handle, and together they walked back to the van. The rideshare for the twins pulled up, and Alice asked, Do you guys want to go home or go with Robin? She looked from Ginny to Charlie, and they each wore a different expression.
There's not room in the van,
Charlie said.
I want to shower and change.
He looked at Ginny, who nodded. Then maybe we can go to Robin's, Ginny said, looking from Alice to Robin. Is that okay? Of course, Alice and Robin said together, and when they looked at each other, they both managed a smile.
Alice Kelton?
The rideshare driver asked. Alice herded her teens into the car with a, text me when you get home and when you get to Robin's. I hope I won't be late, but I don't know what I'm dealing with yet. Okay, Ginny said. Love you. I love you both. Stay together. She closed the door behind them and immediately booked the next car, the one that would take her to the police station. 20 minutes later, the rideshare driver said,
I don't think I can get you any closer.
Alice could not believe the activity at the police station. Robin had not exaggerated when she'd said something big was going down. No less than 7 TV vans had been parked along the street. The parking lot had been taped off and closed, and 4 uniformed officers kept waving traffic by. Stop here, Alice said, gathering her purse. She probably should have gone home and showered and changed too, but her white maxi dress cover-up would have to do. I'll get out. She paid and stepped from the car, a very angry-looking officer coming toward her.
Ma'am, you can't be here.
Oh, I beg to differ, sir, she said. I'm Alice Kelton, attorney at law. You have 2 of my clients detained inside without arrests. I have every right to be here. She swept her gaze down his chest to his name tag. Now, Officer Lundy, Will you kindly escort me to Aaron Sherman or Eloise Sherman?" Officer Lundy visibly swallowed, and he turned and gestured for someone else to come.
"This is Alice Kelton, the chief's lawyer. Will you take her inside?"
He turned toward Alice.
"I just can't believe the chief is involved in this."
"He's not," Alice said. "Thank you, Officer Lundy."
"Officer Burlebury will get you where you need to go."
Alice looked at the other officer and gestured for him to lead on. She followed him in her strappy sandals, getting overwhelmed by the number of people, the shrieking of telephones, and the sheer chaos inside the station. "My goodness," she said, looking around and trying to find something to latch onto. Everything seemed to be in constant motion, and Alice got a little seasick.
"This way, ma'am."
The officer opened a door on his left and started down the steps. She tore her eyes from the fray before her and followed him into the basement. Dozens of people had been put in holding cells down here, and Alice looked at them as she walked by. Her pace slowed as she went past the first one, easily holding 20 people. "What is going on?" she asked. No one answered her, and the noise didn't extend down here. The people here looked to be from every walk of life. They wore suits and ties, board shorts and t-shirts, dresses, jeans. There were men and women, and Alice couldn't make sense of it. Everyone watched her. And as her gaze switched to the second cell, a commotion started near the back and surged forward.
"Alice,"
someone said, and her eyes locked onto Matt Hymas. "No!" She rushed toward him, her heart flying to the back of her throat. "Matt!" she cried. "What are you doing here?" He'd curled his fingers through the grate, and she put her hands on his, searching to see if he was hurt.
"It's Alice,"
he yelled over his shoulder, and a couple of men moved for someone else. Shad came forward, wearing his very businesslike clothes, and Alice gasped again. "What is happening?" She couldn't believe her eyes. What had Laurel done? How could Alice fix it? "Shad, talk to me,"
"You need to talk to the chief first,"
he said with a smile. He really was the kindest, most gentle man. There was no way on this planet he was involved with any drugs coming into the cove. No way. "Does Kelli know you're here?"
"I haven't gotten my call yet,"
Shad said.
"Matt called AJ a few minutes ago. The police are overwhelmed and doing the best they can."
Several people nearby shifted, and Alice sensed that Shad's opinion wasn't the most popular one. "I'm going to make sure they attend to you first," she said. "You're now my clients too, understand?" "Can I be your client?" someone else asked, and Alice threw them an acidic look.
"Alice?"
Her world spun, because this could not be happening. She knew that voice, and it did not belong in a crowded holding cell where Arthur had to wait to defend himself. Instant fear and fury combined in Alice's soul, and both Matt and Shad parted to show her that yes, indeed, Arthur had been brought in too. "Arthur!" She choked the name out. "Why are you here?" He came as close as he could and leaned his forehead against hers through the squares and the bars.
"I live next door to Nathan Baldwin,"
he whispered.
"Apparently I got some of his boxes one day, and I should have known what he was doing because of that."
"That's preposterous," she said, no real power behind the words. She sniffled, and she hated the sound of it. She hated the weakness it fostered inside her. She straightened and met his eye. "I'm going to get you all out of here tonight."
"Ma'am,"
the officer said.
"you can't talk to them."
"Like hell I can't," she barked at him. "These three, Matt Hymas, Shad Webb, and Arthur Rice. I want them in a room by themselves right now. They're my clients, and I demand to be able to speak with them privately." The officer looked like she'd hit him with a brick. Now," she said again, marching toward him. "Get them out of there now, or I'll be filing a lawsuit against you personally and against this entire department for mistreatment."
"I don't have anywhere to put them,"
he said, and Alice could see he was trapped between a rock and a hard place. Alice looked at him and then back to the important people in her life. Let's put them in with Chief Sherman then. I'd like to hear all of their stories at the same time anyway.
Alice, my dad,
Matt said, and Alice frowned at the older gentleman now standing at Matt's side. Yancey Hymas is now my client as well. Bring the 4 of them with us.
Kristen watched in complete horror and disbelief at the images playing on the television screen in front of her. The reporter kept saying he didn't know what was factual and what wasn't, but that, reportedly over 30 people have been taken in for questioning in one of the biggest drug stings in Five Island Cove history. She changed the channel, only to see similar footage. The police aren't saying anything, and there is no official statement from the department, the mayor's office, or anyone at City Hall. Rumors are that the police emptied the building before 2 detectives went in and arrested the city manager, Nathan Baldwin. He's been arrested on charges of drug possession and the intent to sell drugs after over 10 pounds of methamphetamine was found in a box at a local inn. Kristen clicked off the TV and got to her feet. Laurel was not one of her girls, but she had become a close friend and someone Kristen loved. She'd found her phone, called for a ride, and put on her shoes before someone knocked on her door. "Mom?" Reuben called through the door. "Let me in." She hurried to the door and unlocked it, letting her son spill into the house. "Mom, AJ called and said I should come get you and take you to her house. She'll explain everything once you're there." "AJ?" "They have Matt at the station," Reuben said, and Kristen gasped. "And his father, and Shad, and Arthur." The world fell out of the bottom of Kristen's life. "You've got to be kidding." "Eloise and Aaron are there too," Reuben said. "Robin called on the way over. Kelly's on her way to AJ's, as is her sister. Jean and I came to get you." He put his arm around her. "Come on now, your friends are going to need your strength and wisdom." Kristen wasn't sure where either of those things were at the moment, but she dug down deep to find them on the drive over to Ava Jane's.
Chapter 31. Robin woke when light wrapping penetrated her flimsy slumber. Her eyes flew open, and from her position of lying on the couch, she could see straight down the hallway from the living room to the front door. Her phone lay on the coffee table in front of her, and Robin reached for it at the same time she sat up. A sense of spookiness ran through her as she thought of someone standing on her front porch at 2:30 in the morning. Eloise had texted since Robin had checked her phone last. "We're done here. We're coming to get the girls." Robin bolted to her feet when the knocking happened again, this time a little louder. She flew down the hall in her bare feet, unlocked the door, and opened it. Eloise and Aaron stood there, both of them looking like they'd been run over by a truck.
"Robin,"
Aaron whispered, and she flew into his arms. The navy blue midnight sky was a little spooky with the moon throwing her silver light around, and Robin hurried to back up and let them in. "Come in," she said to urge them along. "You shouldn't take the girls. Just sleep here for a while. They're fine."
"I want to see them,"
Elle said as she entered. Robin closed the door and relocked it. When she turned, Eloise took her into a hug that said so much more about what had happened that day. Robin felt Elle's shudder move from her chest into Robin's, and while she wanted to cry and she wanted the whole story right now, she simply held Eloise together for a few moments. She cleared her throat and said, "I put them in my bed. I wasn't going to sleep anyway, and they didn't want to be on the second floor. It worked out because then Charlie and Ginny came. They're upstairs." Elle stepped back and nodded. She faced Aaron, laced her fingers through his, and together they padded down the hall and turned left. Robin followed them, wrapping her arms around herself. She couldn't believe what had transpired today. She'd talked to AJ, who'd spoken to Matt on the phone from jail, for over an hour. She'd tried texting Alice, but she only got back a terse response that had said, "Yes, they're all here, and yes, I'm getting them out." She hadn't heard from her since. She'd learned about dinner time that Kristen and Kelli had gathered at AJ's house, but she didn't want to pack up 6 kids and join them. She'd ordered pizza, which had taken forever to come, and she'd stayed glued to her phone while Mandy and Ginny spearheaded game night to help everyone stay calm and have fun.
Robin?
Charlie whispered, and she turned away from the hallway and back toward the stairs. "What's going on, Charlie?" she asked. "Are you okay?"
I heard someone knocking.
He finished coming down the stairs, and though he stood a foot taller than Robin and he'd turned 17 a few months ago, right now he looked like a frightened rabbit. She got a healthy reminder that he was just a kid, and she wrapped him in a hug. "It was Aaron and Eloise," she said. "They went to check on their kids, and then I hoped to talk to them."
Have you heard from my mom?
"No, sweetie, I'm sorry,"
I'm sure she's all right.
Charlie said, grinding his voice through his throat.
If Aaron and Eloise are here, she can't still be at the station, right?
Robin's phone began to buzz in her hand, and she stepped back from Charlie to look at it. "It's her now," she said. "Should I put her on speaker?" The blue light from her phone illuminated Charlie's hopeful face, and he nodded. Robin swiped on the call and tapped the speaker button. "Alice," she said, her voice still somewhat muted. She stepped into the office to hopefully keep the call from echoing up the stairs and back to the bedrooms. "Charlie was just asking about you." "He's still awake?" Alice asked, and she sounded like the same old Alice she'd always been. "Eloise just got here," Robin said, avoiding the picture window that looked out over the front yard. The deep of the night scared her for some reason. "I think the knocking woke him up." She glanced at Charlie, who remained standing in front of her desk as Robin sat behind it. "Where are you?" Robin asked. "I was hoping to go with Arthur," Alice said, finally sounding a bit uneasy. "I wanted to know how the twins were, how everyone is." "I think we're all about the way you'd expect us to be. Shocked." "It's all worked out," Alice said. "I mean, it's not all worked out, but Yancey and Matt left a half an hour ago. They should be home by now. Shad went with them because Kelli is staying at AJ's. Arthur stayed with me, but he could have left a while ago. Aaron and Elle were the last to leave. I mean, besides their night crew." Robin heard footsteps, and she and Charlie looked toward her office door at the same time. Eloise entered first, followed by Aaron. "It's Alice." "What happened?" Robin asked. Eloise started the story with the woman who'd arrived to unpack her toiletries. Aaron filled in most of the vital police bits, especially after they'd arrested her and taken her to the station for questioning. The dots had connected to Marilyn Benson, and then to Polly Baldwin, and then to Nathan Baldwin. "Because of his position in the city," Alice said, "they decided to bring in everyone who even touched him. So Arthur is Nathan's next-door neighbor. Shad works in the office right next door to him, and they have a close friendship. They run money through the city, and to be honest, I'm not sure Shad's completely out of the woods yet." Aaron shook his head and said,
I don't think he is.
in a quiet voice. During the story, he and Eloise had taken the 2 chairs in front of Robin's office. Charlie had retreated to the couch and sat down.
I don't think I am either.
Aaron said. "What?" Robin asked. "Aaron, that can't be true,"
They've put me on administrative leave.
he said.
Paul's going to run the investigation into what I knew, what anyone in the department knew, and when. I mean, Elle and I had Polly and Nathan over for dinner only a few weeks ago. We could have been conspiring with them, you know?
"We weren't," Eloise said firmly. "That was the most mind-numbing night of my life."
Yes, but then we knew about Polly's company, right?
Aaron smiled at Eloise, and it seemed so out of place that Robin found it romantic. "Anyway, they brought in everyone who'd been getting deliveries from Marilyn," Alice said. "Every employee in her beauty business, everyone from Cove Creations."
That's Polly's company.
Eloise said. "Everyone who Nathan Baldwin started naming," That's how Arthur got picked up. Alice continued. Matt and Yancey had already been questioned in the past, and they hadn't mentioned that they'd taken a delivery from Benson Beauty several months ago. I guess someone thought that might be them trying to hide something. Alice sighed. In short, they brought in over 60 people, and they have a fraction of that in terms of manpower and interviewing space. It took a while to get through everyone. She paused, and Robin sensed something else needed to be said, but no one wanted to say it.
Laurel insisted on talking to everyone, even if they'd been interviewed by someone else.
Aaron said. He cleared his throat.
She's a good cop.
Alice and Eloise remained silent, and Eloise even folded her arms. She did her job, Alice said. She seemed so cold, Aaron, don't you think? And I honestly don't think she believed anything anyone said. I think she thinks they're all guilty in some way.
Detectives have to detach themselves from the case and the elements in it.
Aaron said softly.
That includes the people. We know her,
Eloise said.
She knows us. She's been spending time with us for months, almost a year. I just don't see how she could have looked at Shad the way she did, demanding to know if he'd been laundering money through the city budget and accounts to hide the drug activity.
Robin sucked in a breath. She did that? She accused Matt and Yancey of the same thing. Alice said. In the end, I told her she better charge them with something and there better be evidence or we better get to leave. She has no evidence.
Yet.
Aaron said.
It'll take her some time to go through everything they took from City Hall and those 2 warehouses. They're not going to find anything on Shad or Matt,
Eloise said.
They're not money launderers.
She shook her head, her disgust at the very idea apparent. Robin couldn't imagine either one of them doing anything illegal either, but she remained silent. Where's Laurel now? She asked, because she did care about Laurel. Eloise had spoken true. They'd been friends with her for a while now, and Robin had a particularly close relationship with her that had bloomed and strengthened as they planned her wedding together. She knew Alice was close with Laurel too, and Eloise had been making an effort to get to know her well since she worked with Aaron so closely.
She was still at the station when we left,
Aaron finally said.
She and Tom were in my office with Paul.
I'm going to petition that Paul be removed, by the way, Alice said. It's not right that he and Laurel are dating and they're leading this investigation together. It's a conflict of interest.
Internal Affairs will do it,
Aaron said, reaching up to rub his hand over his eyes.
Paul will just get debriefed.
And he'll tell Laurel, Alice said firmly. No, that's not happening. Who's behind him?
Lester Stone,
Aaron said.
He's a good cop too.
He sounded so tired.
They're all good cops, Alice.
I'm sure they are, she said briskly. Listen, it's late. We just got to Arthur's. You're with your girls. Let's all get some sleep and talk later.
Yes, I'm exhausted,
Eloise said. Robin, the twins are okay there? She looked at Charlie, who raised his head and nodded. They're fine, Alice. They're so great to have around. They kept the younger kids busy with games tonight, and Charlie ordered pizza and cleaned it all up. Her heart squeezed with love for Alice and her children. They're fine here. We'll sleep late tomorrow, and I'll make pancakes and bacon around 10. Everyone should come. Text it out, Alice said. Everyone's on Diamond, so I'm sure they'll all come. Even Laurel? Robin wondered, but she didn't ask. The call ended, and she took Eloise and Aaron upstairs to the last remaining guest bedroom. Once they were settled, and Charlie had gone back to bed, Robin retreated back to the couch. She wanted Duke's strong arms around her. She wanted his comforting voice in her ear, whispering that everything would be okay. She wanted to have his anchoring spirit near her, because without him, she tended to spin wildly out of control. Breakfast at my house at 10. She texted to the group thread, not removing Laurel from it or starting a new one. If she wanted to come, she should. Robin didn't think in a million years that Laurel would show her face at breakfast in the morning. A sigh pulled through her whole body, and she lay back down and repositioned the blanket over herself. She kept her phone in her palm, both of them pressed to her chest. The vibration from a text snapped her eyes open, and she lifted the device to read Laurel's message. It had come only to her, and it read, "I'm so sorry for everything, Robin. I understand if you don't want to finish the wedding. I can't imagine anyone will talk to me again. That's okay, and I don't blame them. Sorry again." Robin's fingers flew across the screen, and she sent reassuring text after reassuring text. Surely everyone would forgive Laurel. She was only doing her job. But Robin hadn't had a loved one taken to the station, held for hours, and then questioned and accused of helping move drugs through the cove. How would she feel if she had? Her chest tightened at the mere memory of Laurel saying that Duke could be bringing in drugs on his fishing boat, and she swallowed the lump that had formed in her throat. Laurel never texted back. Chapter 32. Eloise moved through her days as if underwater. Everything seemed blue and gray, and people's words seemed to take a long time to enter her ears and make sense of. She got up and went to the inn, as she usually did. Aaron came with her for the first week, and they brought the girls too. He'd take them to the beach during the busy times, and they'd stay and eat dinner with the guests. Life seemed so normal in some ways, but completely warped in others. AJ had started a text string without Laurel on it, but Eloise texted her privately and told her the location of the Wednesday lunches. 2 had passed now, and Laurel hadn't come to either. She hadn't even responded to any of Eloise's texts. "Back today," she said as she entered the kitchen. Her voice sounded warbled, as if she'd tried to speak to her husband under the water. "How are you feeling?" He looked up from his breakfast of toast, eggs, coffee, and the latest internet news on his tablet.
"Good,"
he said.
"It's going to be fine now. I'm cleared now."
"Took them long enough?" she said.
"Internal affairs doesn't do anything quickly."
He got up from the table with a groan.
"Things are settling down. Laurel and Tom will make their case, and they're working with the DA now. There's no more spotlight on me, or Matt, or Shad, or anyone."
He put his empty plate in the sink and slid his arm around Eloise. She poured coffee into her mug, feeling as hot and boiled as it was. "She won't return my texts." She didn't have to name who she was. They'd discussed Laurel at length.
"She's embarrassed,"
Aaron whispered.
"She needs time. You know Laurel."
"Yes," Eloise said, looking up at her husband. "I do know Laurel, and I know what running away looks like and feels like. I know she's done it before. I know she'd rather just stand in the background than talk. I know she misses us." Her voice cracked, and Eloise shook her head and focused on loading her coffee with sugar. "I know she'd like to come to lunch. I know she'd want to hug Kristen and confess how nervous she is to get married. And I know she wants us all at her wedding, but we haven't even gotten an announcement." Eloise turned in his arms and held him. "I know she has them because Robin said they went out last week. I know I hate feeling like this. I know I hate it when you tell me her schedule so I can come to the station and not run into her." She wetted his shirt with her tears, and to Aaron's credit, he just stood still and held her with all the strength he had. She gained control of herself and stepped away from him. "I'm sorry to ruin your morning. You're probably nervous too."
"A little,"
he said.
"But Elle, you never ruin anything for me."
He brushed her hair back.
"You're going to see your mom today?"
Eloise took a deep breath. "Yes," she said. "The girls have gifts for her for Grace's birthday."
"Tell her happy birthday from me,"
he said, kissing Eloise's forehead.
"I'll bring dinner home tonight for everyone."
"She's coming with us. Eloise said.
I remember.
Aaron reached for his keys and wallet, kissed her again, and walked out into the garage. Eloise slumped against the counter, her coffee forgotten. She'd sent a lot of texts to Robin over the past couple of weeks, until finally Robin had asked her to stop asking about Laurel. It put Robin in an awkward spot, and Eloise had never felt so bad. She'd taken lunch to Robin and apologized, and they were fine now. Her phone rang from behind her, and she reached for it. "Did you forget something?" she asked, already moving toward the garage door.
No,
Aaron said.
I just wanted to let you know that today is also Laurel's day off. She didn't want it to be awkward for me on my first day back.
Confusion ran through Eloise. "Okay," she said. Hadn't she just told him she hated it when he told her Laurel's schedule? Plus, she already had plans to spend the day with her mom on Sanctuary. "I can't bring you lunch today." He chuckled and said,
I know, love. Have a good day.
He ended the call, and Eloise looked at her phone to make sure the call had been real. For a man of not many words, Aaron calling to tell her Laurel wouldn't be in that day made no sense. "Eloise?" Grace said behind her, and Eloise turned back to the house. "Yeah, sweetie?" She let the garage door close behind her as she approached the girl. Grace had gotten dressed, which was surprising all on its own. Eloise had learned that the child had to be prodded and poked to do everything, from getting dressed to finding shoes to getting in the tub. "I can't find my card for your mom." She also lost things left and right. Eloise smiled at her. "Let's see," she said. "I think you were working on it with your dad last night. It's probably on his desk." She led the way into Aaron's study, a place she didn't normally go. He kept an array of pictures and papers tacked to the back wall, and she could distinctly remember when he'd laid out the evidence of how much money Kelli's father had been taking from women around the cove. She didn't look at the things hanging there now, and instead focused on his desk. Outside the window to her left, a lawnmower started. She glanced that way and saw the lawn care company Aaron paid to keep up with the yard. All at once, a flash of lightning hit her smack dab in the brain. "Lawn care," she said. The card for her mother forgotten. Laurel wouldn't be at the station today, and when she had days off, she spent them in her yard. "Here it is," Grace said, but Eloise barely heard her. "Billy?" she called, but the teenager probably wasn't up yet. She hurried through the house to her room and knocked as she opened the door. Billy lay in bed, her eyes closed, frowning. "Billy, you don't have to get up. I have to run out for a few minutes, and I'm going to leave Grace with my tablet. Can she watch in here?" "Yes," Billy said in an annoyed, groggy voice. "I'll give her headphones." "Fine, whatever." Billy rolled over, and Eloise turned. She left the door open and rushed to get Grace, the tablet, and the headphones. With the girls all set up for a while, she called a rideshare, quickly changed out of her pajamas, and ran her fingers through her hair. She'd taken one slurp of coffee, though what she was about to do had her heart racing already, when the ride arrived. She got in the back seat and repeated the address she'd already put into the app. 10 minutes later, the car pulled up to Laurel's house. "Thank you," Eloise said. She got out and stood on the sidewalk, soaking up the sight of the house. The front yard hadn't been mowed yet, and in fact, a few weeds had infested the front flower beds. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a machine ran, and it could have been a lawnmower or a chainsaw for all Eloise knew. She started up the driveway and went to the front door. The doorbell rang through the house, but no footsteps accompanied it. Eloise frowned, her mind spinning. "She's obviously not here," she muttered to herself. "Now what are you going to do?" "Eloise?" She spun toward Laurel's voice. The sight of the woman standing there in long jeans, a ratty t-shirt, and gardening gloves, the best thing Eloise had seen in weeks. A sob flew from her throat, and she rushed down the stairs and straight into Laurel's arms. It's enough, she said through her tears and the lump in her throat. You can't keep hiding from us, from me. I'm done letting you do that. She stepped back and kept her grip on Laurel's shoulders. You're coming to Sanctuary with me today. It's Grace's birthday this weekend, and the girls made gifts for my mom. We might go swimming at the inn, or we might go to the beach, or we might just sit on my mom's back deck and sip lemonade. But you're coming. Laurel hadn't smiled or said anything else yet. She shook her head, everything about her so sad. I can't. She swallowed and cleared her throat. I have so much yard work to do. Desperation clogged Eloise's throat as it moved down into her stomach. Please, she said. I hate not seeing you. I hate that you won't respond to my texts. Eloise. Laurel sighed and stepped back. She focused on her gardening gloves as Eloise let her hands fall back to her sides. I'm coming to the wedding, Eloise said, clearing the tears from her eyes. I'm going to keep texting you until you come back to the group. Laurel looked up and over Eloise's shoulder. They don't want me back. Of course they do. They just needed some time to process it all. It's been long enough. AJ won't forgive me. I'm sure she has already, Eloise said, though she hadn't spoken to AJ in almost a week. She'd still been upset at last week's luncheon, but Eloise dismissed that thought. They know you didn't mean to hurt anyone, that you were just doing your job. You didn't directly accuse any of them or Shad or Matt or anyone of doing anything wrong. You just asked questions. None of them even got arrested. Laurel shook her head again. I've had news crews on my lawn for days. They've only just now started clearing out. I need to get the weeds pulled and the grass cut. Laurel, Eloise said sharply, look at me. She did, but her gaze didn't hold for long. I'm sorry, Eloise. Maybe I'm the one who needs more time to process. Process what? Laurel took a deep breath and blew it out. What you said is right, she said slowly. I was just doing my job, and I'm really good at that job. I'm a good cop. You are. But in order to be a good cop, I have to distrust everyone. I did distrust Matt, and Shad, and Arthur. I thought they could be involved. That's what a good cop does. They look at everyone the same. Anyone could have done it, even if they're the nicest guy in the world, and even if they're engaged to your best friends. She spoke slowly, deliberately, as if she'd gone over this speech several times before delivering it. I don't trust anyone, and that's what makes me a good cop. But it also makes me a terrible friend. No, it doesn't, Eloise said. Another car pulled into the driveway, and Eloise watched as Paul got out of the cruiser. He looked at Laurel, wiped his hands down the front of his jeans, and then smiled at Eloise. Good morning, El. He moved right to Laurel's side and put his arm around her. You okay, baby? Yes, Laurel said, lifting her chin and meeting Eloise's eyes fully for at least a couple of seconds. I'm sorry, Eloise. Tell them I'm sorry, but I'm not. Tell Grace happy birthday from me. With that, she turned and went into the garage, leaving Eloise to face Paul. She's seeing a counselor, he said quietly. This has been really hard for her. I know that, Eloise said, not bothering to keep her voice down. Tears filled her eyes again. She doesn't have to punish herself like this. Everyone would welcome her back, I just know it. Paul smiled and wrapped her in a hug. You're an amazing friend, he whispered. It's so good to see you. Aaron's back at work today, she said against his shoulder. I know, Paul said. I'm here to try to get Laurel to go in for the party at lunch. He pulled back and grinned at Eloise. You might have broken the ice for me to do that. Eloise looked into the garage, but Laurel had walked right through it and into the backyard. Good luck, Paul. He'd need it. And Eloise added a prayer to that as she rode back home to get the girls up and ready to go see her mother. Chapter 33. Robin would need bionic fingers by the time she finished texting everyone who needed a text. Can't wait, she sent to her husband, along with a few heart emojis. Duke would be home next week, and Robin couldn't wait. Laurel's wedding was the last big event she had before the calendar moved into winter. She'd gotten the girls off to school alone, just as she had last year. Once the wedding finished today, Robin planned to wear pants with an elastic waist, drink all day if she wanted to, and count down the minutes until Duke docked in the cove. Then she'd have to sober up, put on real pants, and get back to work. She had a Halloween party to plan for the largest corporation in Five Island Cove, a female-owned and run candle company, and then she was looking forward to a slower holiday season. "Any news from you and Arthur?" she sent to Alice. They hadn't spoken of much else besides Laurel and the arraignment of Nathan Baldwin since Alice had told her she was engaged. She'd announced it at the next luncheon, and Robin had dutifully told Laurel. She opened that text string next and said, "I'll be at the Slipper by 10. Everything we need is there, so just bring yourself and your police dress and we'll be good to go." She smiled and added, "You're getting married today, Laurel. It's going to be so amazing." Laurel would respond to business texts, but she'd clammed right up over the personal ones in the past few weeks. Robin sighed as the message she got back was, "Thanks, Robin. See you at 10. And nothing more. Everything felt stuffed and stilted when it came to Laurel, and Robin didn't know what to do about it. Eloise had tried going over there. She texted Laurel every day now. Her fingers flew as she sent a text to the group. "Everyone should be at the Glass Slipper by 11:30, ready to go. If you want to get ready there, that's fine. There's tons of room, and you can show up any time after 10. Laurel and I will be there then." She sent the message, and when she didn't get immediate responses, besides Eloise, who said, "I'll be there at 10, Robin suspected the others might not come to the wedding at all. That horrible thought had been gnawing away at her for days, weeks. She couldn't shake it, and she couldn't fathom it at the same time. She sent another text to Alice. "You're coming to the wedding, right?" "I don't know," Alice sent back. So she'd seen the other messages. "And I don't know about Arthur either. We need to make a plan." "Yes," Robin said, "you do." She navigated over to Kelli's individual text string and sent the same message to her she'd sent to Alice. "You're coming to the wedding, right?" Kelli didn't answer, and Robin repeated the message to every single person individually. Kristen, AJ, Jean, even Lisa. Robin was an excellent lecturer, and this distance and silence between them and Laurel was honestly exhausting. She tapped out what she hoped would be something to make them feel guilty for the way they were behaving, and she sent it to every single one of them. She didn't care if they didn't want to talk to her after this. She would never abandon a friend on her wedding day. She silenced her phone and got in the shower. When she got out, she saw Eloise had called, and she called her back. "You sent a lecture to Alice?" Eloise asked in lieu of hello. "She deserves it," Robin shot back. "I sent one to everyone. They're all acting like babies. You and I are the only ones who seem to understand Laurel was doing her job. Nothing bad happened to any of them. It's time to move on, for crying out loud." Eloise said nothing, and Robin decided she didn't care about that either. "I'm getting dressed," she said. "I have to check on the girls and about 50 pieces of glassware. I'll see you at the Slipper." "Okay," Eloise said quietly, and Robin ended the call. Maybe she'd gone a little overboard in the lecture. Part of her cared, but another part of her simply wanted everyone to come together and make things right. They couldn't do that if no one would talk. Tears filled her eyes, and she pressed them back. She finished getting ready, right down to her flawless makeup and her new, shiny red heels. She went out into the kitchen to find Mandy and Jamie already dressed as well, and she drew them both into a hug. "Oh, I love you guys," she said. "Promise me that we'll never stop talking. If things go bad, if something happens, we have to sit down and talk about it." She drew back and looked at them. "Okay?" Without conversation, things die. Okay, Mom, Jamie said. They're not coming to the wedding? Mandy asked. I don't know, Robin said, helplessness clouding her thoughts. I honestly don't know. Half an hour later, she arrived at the Glass Slipper. She parked her van right out front, and the three of them started unloading. By 10, she had everything in the bridal room. Everything was getting put together in the main hall where the ceremony and buffet would take place. She stood in the doorway of it, the wall of windows down both sides bringing in brilliant sunshine that made the Glass Slipper the treasure it was. Claudio, the owner, worked on a ladder to hang flowers from the ceiling, and the whole place would look like a scene straight out of Cinderella when he finished. Across the hall from her, Robin focused on the altar. Laurel and Paul had chosen a pattern for the fabric that emulated their jobs, and all the peach-colored police badges did was remind Robin why so many of her friends wouldn't be there that day. She'd gotten several texts back from them after she'd laid into them, but she hadn't read any of them. Cowardly, she supposed, but she had a job to do that day too, and she wasn't going to let their negativity and refusal to forgive infect her.
Everything is okay?
Claudio asked, and Robin put her professional smile on her face. Yes, everything is wonderful, she said, turning as the first scent of food met her nose. The buffet goes along the left side, she said, pointing the way for the chefs as they came streaming in. The windows on that side actually opened out onto a gorgeous patio and then the beach. And as Robin watched, someone began setting up tables outside, too. Everything was going to be perfect for this wedding, except the fact that Robin and Eloise would be Laurel's only friends there. Where is she? Robin asked, pacing in the bride's room. Her daughters stayed busy on their phones on a couch in front of the windows, but Eloise paced with her.
Why won't she answer?
Eloise lowered her phone.
You try again.
She's not going to pick up, Robin said, about to crack. I can't believe Laurel isn't here. I can't believe she'd do this to Paul.
When's the last time you talked to her?
Eloise asked. Robin sighed because they'd been over this already. This morning. She texted this morning. She said she'd be here at 10. A quick glance at her phone told Robin the time had ticked past 11. The wedding started in less than an hour. Is Aaron with Paul?
Yes,
Eloise said, her voice a ghost of itself.
Should I go tell him?
I honestly don't know anymore. Robin stopped walking and faced the beach outside. She simply wanted to fly away and never come back. This wedding was supposed to be the second biggest event of the year, behind Eloise and Aaron's wedding. The entire police force was coming, as they didn't seem to have any problem with what Laurel had done to bring down the biggest drug conspiracy the Cove had ever seen. They'd found over 500 pounds of meth in the Cove Creations warehouse, and Nathan Baldwin was facing a dozen charges, as was Marilyn Benson, and a handful of hotel owners. Laurel had literally cracked the case and provided a safer environment for kids of every age, their parents, and the whole community. And yet, her friends remained silent. Unbelievable, Robin thought. What if she doesn't show up?
I'm calling her again,
Eloise said, but Robin had lost hope. All she could see was waste. A waste of her time and energy on this wedding. A waste of Laurel and Paul's money. A waste of food. The complete waste of a year, as Laurel had become such an integral part of all of their lives. How could everyone just throw that away? Behind her, the door opened, and Robin spun that way, her heart pounding like a jackhammer. Kristen walked in, with Jean and Reuben right behind her, and Robin sobbed as she ran toward her. You came, she said, wrapping Kristen into her arms. My goodness, you came! Thank you for coming.
Of course I came,
Kristen said. Didn't you read my texts? Robin couldn't admit that she hadn't, because she was still so stunned Kristen had come. Of course she would, though, because Kristen was the ultimate example of forgiveness and kindness. Where's Laurel? Jean asked, and Robin released Kristen to face her. We don't know, Robin said, searching their faces. You haven't seen her, have you? Chapter 34. Laurel sat in her police cruiser, wishing she'd driven another car. At the same time, everything she needed for the wedding had been loaded into this car last night, and it made no sense to drag it all out and into a rideshare. She saw the curtains flicker in the window, and she closed her eyes. Make it right, then. The words ran through her head in Dr. Adams's voice, and Laurel couldn't put off what she needed to do for another day. She did want her friends back. She'd told her therapist that several times. Finally, Dr. Adams had told her to make it right then. Do the work, Laurel. You don't get anything if you don't do the work. Drawing a deep breath, Laurel focused on this moment, the one right in front of her. The one where the car was too hot and the radio too loud. The one where her throat itched and her eyes burned. The one where everything relaxed and her shoulders finally went down. Leaving her phone in the car, Laurel got out of it and headed for the porch. The front door opened before she even reached the steps, and Matt Hymas came out of his house. For a moment, Laurel thought he'd turn her away, but instead he smiled.
It's about time you came by,
he said, leaning against the top pillar. I'm so sorry, Matt, she said. She climbed the steps while he watched her. And while she knew Matt, she couldn't say they were best friends. She stepped toward him awkwardly and hugged him. I hope you can forgive me.
There's nothing for me to forgive,
he said. She stepped away and nodded. How's AJ?
She's right through there,
he said.
Go see for yourself.
Laurel braced herself, feeling every muscle from her heel to her shoulder tense. She relaxed them one by one as her breath whooshed out of her mouth. Okay. She walked inside while Matt stayed out, and the scent of sausage met her nose. She's here, Lisa said, and she tossed the kitchen towel in her hand on the counter. Hello, Laurel. She approached and sort of grabbed onto Laurel in a second awkward hug. Ava Jane, she's here. I heard, AJ said, coming down the hall with her son in her arms. Would you? She passed Asher to Lisa, who cooed at him as she grinned at the baby. She sighed and looked at Laurel. Her heartbeat quivered at the sight of the tall, beautiful woman. I'm so sorry, she said, her eyes darting to movement in the office. Alice appeared, with Kelli right behind her. Oh, you're all here. You asked us to come, Alice said. I did, yes. Laurel missed Alice with a strength she didn't understand. I'm so sorry, Alice. I didn't know Arthur lived next door to Nathan. I didn't mean to get him in trouble or cause you so much work. Alice sighed and looked at Kelli. I'm sorry, Kelli, Laurel said. She'd been practicing her sorries for days. She'd said it in a text, and she'd left the group message to give people time and room to find their own way through the chaos the case had caused. Right now, all she could do was apologize. I'm really sorry, she said again. I didn't know it would go to Nathan, and I didn't know it would paint Shad in a bad light. She faced AJ, who intimidated her the most, though she wished someone else would say something. She told herself she didn't expect them to say it was okay, because it wasn't. I'm not great at being friends, she said. That's an excuse, but it's also real, because if we weren't friends before all of this, I wouldn't be here apologizing. I'm good with cases. I'm good with not letting personal feelings get in the way. Her voice broke, so maybe she wasn't all that good at that. She cleared the emotion away. I've had some experience with putting my feelings aside and soldiering on, but I wanted to apologize. I wanted to explain that everything happened way too fast. The whole force was called in, and the next thing I knew, we were bringing in anyone who'd even looked at Nathan Baldwin in the past year. She tucked her hands in her jeans pockets, noting that none of them were dressed for a wedding. Her heart thrashed painfully against her ribcage at the thought of getting married without them there to see it. She owed so much to this group of women who'd taken her under their wing, loved her, and healed her. I hope you can forgive me one day, but I know better than most that relationships aren't the same after something like this. They might mend, but they also might not, and no matter what, it won't be the same. She nodded. Her piece said, "That's all. That's all I can say." She smiled at Lisa and Asher, and surprisingly, they both smiled back. "Okay, well, I'm sure Robin's beside herself that I'm not at the Glass Slipper. She's probably called a dozen times." Laurel took a step toward the still open front door. "I'll see you around." Her foot had just touched the porch when Alice said, "Laurel, get back in here." She turned, unsure of what she'd just heard. "What?" Alice rushed at her and grabbed her in a hug. "Robin can wait," she whispered. When she pulled back, Laurel saw the hint of tears in her eyes and a smile as wide as the ocean. "Come help me pick my shoes to go with my dress. You were going to do that, remember?" Laurel's mind spun. "What?" she asked again. "I forgive you," Alice said. "I've been trying to figure out how to text you or call you for a couple of weeks now, and I'm sorry I haven't figured out how." "Me too," Kelli said, her voice wavering. "It took me a while to realize that of course you had to look at Shad as closely as you did. He could have been hiding money in all kinds of places. He understood what you were doing more than I did." She exchanged a glance with AJ, and when Alice stepped back, Kelli took her place and hugged Laurel. "He's almost here, and he's bringing my clothes for the wedding." "What?" Laurel wasn't ever going to say anything different again. "You're coming to the wedding?" "I wouldn't miss it," Kelli whispered. She stepped back, her chin wobbling. "I'm just so bad at talking to people after a conflict, or before, or during. I'm getting better, but I'm bad at it." "I'm worse," AJ said, her smile flashing so fast Laurel barely saw it. "I was so mad at you, Laurel. It felt like you were trying to take something from me I'd waited for and worked for so long." "Babe," Matt said, but AJ held up her hand. "It took me the longest to understand that you weren't. And then I found myself in the same boat as some of the others. I wasn't brave like Eloise, and I couldn't figure out how to talk to you." Laurel stared at the three of them. "I don't know what to say." "You're going to come help me with my shoes," Alice said, grinning. "Arthur's going to be here soon, and I need to at least be dressed." She hooked her arm through Laurel's, who stumbled forward to go with her. "Look," Kelli said. "Shad's here, so you can help me get dressed too. I still don't know how to zip up that gown." Laurel looked over her shoulder as Shad came up the steps, several bags swinging from his arms and draped over his shoulder. "That ride from Pearl was a bear," he said. "I'm about to drop these." Matt lunged toward him to help, and Kelli stepped past Laurel and Alice too. "I'm really sorry," AJ said, taking Laurel from Alice and hugging her. "You're a good person, Laurel. You did the right thing. Please don't feel bad about it anymore." "I don't know how to not feel bad about it," she whispered. "Did you take down the drug lord?" AJ asked, turning as her son started to fuss. "Yes," Laurel said. "Then you don't have anything to feel bad about." "I made a lot of people's lives hard," Laurel said, "including yours." "For less than a day," AJ said. "And yes, I was scared, and yes, I was mad, but I got over it. You should too." "You make it sound so easy," Matt said, chuckling. He shook his head as he passed. "I'm putting this stuff in the bedroom." "Come on," AJ said. "Let's go get ready, and I'll catch you up on everything Asher's been doing the past 3 weeks." "Oh boy," Alice said in a dry tone. "I think Laurel would rather hear about the new restaurant going in by the dress shop." They did cause the pipe to burst right before Elle's wedding, but it's all fixed up now, and there's a new southern barbecue place going in.
Wow, Laurel said. Do you think they'll stay in business? Who knows? Kelli asked from behind Laurel. People here don't eat anything but lobster, I swear. They need to branch out. Laurel smiled, and it felt so good to do that. Guys, she said, as she got herded into the master bedroom, I have to get my phone and call Robin.
Nope, Alice said, stepping out of her khakis. Kelli will text her. Now, which of these shoes is going to look better with my dress?
She shimmied into the dress and then put on one bright blue heel and one white one. Blue, Laurel said, and Alice nodded to herself in the mirror.
Yes, I think so too.
She met Laurel's eyes, and while everything didn't magically go back to the way it had been before she'd sat across the table from Alice and Arthur and asked him questions about the packages he'd taken in for Nathan, it suddenly improved. She detected no malice in Alice, no disappointment, no deceit. She'd truly forgiven Laurel. Kelli laughed as she said she'd give Alice $100 if she'd wear one of each shoe as she walked down the aisle, and Laurel found herself joining in with a giggle. Thank you, she said as they all quieted. Thank you for forgiving me. They converged on her and hugged her, and Laurel closed her eyes and basked in the friendship and love from these three women.
My word, Alice said. Is that the time? Robin is going to rip you apart.
She bent and hurried to get her shoes in the right boxes. Laurel saw the clock and how close it had gotten to 11. I thought Kelli texted her. I forgot, Kelli said, picking something up off the bed. I'm not even sure where my phone is. Let's go, Laurel said. I'll call her from the car. I'm sorry, she said the moment she entered the bride's room. She'd already apologized to Robin in the car, and she grinned as she pushed the door all the way open and held it for AJ, Kelli, and Alice to walk through. That's my cue to leave, Reuben said, and joy filled Laurel that he and his wife had come. She grabbed him in a hug as he tried to pass, and neither of them said anything. Laurel hugged Jean, too, and then Kristen, the woman who'd been so accepting, so caring, and so loving, enveloped her in a hug. I'm so glad you're here. I am too, Kristen said. You'll answer my texts now, won't you? Yes, Laurel said, another wave of guilt cutting through her. I'll answer texts now. Good, Eloise said, practically punching the word at her. Because I'm tired of texting into an abyss. She took Laurel from Kristen, her smile as genuine as they came. I've been so worried about you. You do know I drive by your house every day, right? Just to make sure you're still alive? Aaron is so sick of me asking about you. Laurel let her eyes fill with tears as she nodded. I'm sorry, Eloise. Really, I am. I just didn't know how to build the bridge.
Yes,
Robin said, arriving on the scene.
Eloise is an excellent bridge builder. Let's get you dressed.
She was all business, and Laurel didn't want to cause her more stress. Everyone she wanted to be at the wedding was there, and her mother entered the room a moment later. Oh, good, she's here. Mom. Laurel turned away from Robin and the policewoman's skirt she held to hug her mom. She'd told her where she was headed that morning, and the relief she felt at the forgiveness of her friends overcame her. She sagged into her mother's hug as she said, Paul is so excited to marry you. Paul. Yes, Laurel said, trying to focus her thoughts on Paul. Let's not make him, or anyone else, wait longer than we said they'd have to. From there, a flurry of activity happened around Laurel. Robin helped her get dressed. She sat in a chair and let her mother braid her hair into a crown while Alice and AJ applied her makeup. We're 5 minutes late, Robin said, rushing over with the bouquet. She handed it to Laurel and backed up, a fond smile filling her face. You are simply stunning. It's time to get married, Laurel. She turned on her heel and said, Places, everyone. Get in line, please. It's time.
Laurel stayed near the windows while everyone else filed into place. She met her father at the door, where he kissed her forehead and said,
I'm so happy for you, Laurel.
"Thank you, Dad," she said. Everything about this wedding was different than her first. Just having her parents there was a huge difference, as she'd been forced into a previous marriage against her will. The whole thing had taken a few minutes at some city building in mainland Massachusetts. Now she stepped into the mouth of the hall and looked out into the vast space before her. Everyone had gotten to their feet, and some marching, police music with a hint of bagpipe played over the speaker system. White, yellow, and peach flowers drifted from the ceiling, creating an ethereal feel to the room.
Ready?
Her dad asked, while Laurel was still scanning the faces in the audience. She saw her friends down at the end of the aisle, all standing in the first couple of rows now. She saw Eloise's mother, and Robin's, and all of AJ's family members. Every cop she knew, and everyone she didn't, stood there in their uniforms, their hats tucked under their arms. They wore gloves and dress stripes, and Laurel absolutely felt like she belonged to the department. Tom stood with his wife right in the very back row, closest to her, and he saluted her with a giant smile on his face. Her eyes traveled down the length of both walls made of windows, where the oceanic breeze came in to keep the air cool and touch everything with the scent of sea and salt. She saw Paul standing at the altar, and her view narrowed to just him. His smile, his dark eyes shining with joy, his pressed and perfect uniform. "Yes," she said through a dry throat. "I'm ready."
Chapter 35. Here's what I think, Kelli said as she set down a plate with 2 pieces of wedding cake on it. She sat in her chair and looked at Alice. "You and I should get married together." Alice picked up her fork and took a bite of one of the pieces of cake. She leaned closer to Kelli and further from her fiancé.
"What are you talking about?"
"You don't want a big wedding," Kelli said. "You haven't scheduled anything. I don't want a big wedding. I haven't scheduled anything. I just want to get it done."
"Okay,"
Alice said slowly, glancing around the room where people danced. Laurel and Paul looked like they'd been haloed in heavenly light, and Kelli loved the feelings of happiness and bliss she could only find at a wedding. "So we do it at the same time. Get one pastor, set up one wedding. I'll go first if you want. Then you can get married. Then, I don't know. We move on with our lives." Alice trained her eyes on Kelli again.
"I've already talked to Robin about doing something in her backyard."
Kelli's heart fell to her toes and then rebounded back into place. "Perfect," she said. "Can I just tag along?" A smile spread across Alice's face.
"I don't see why not."
She leaned back and looked at Arthur.
"And it wouldn't be tagging along."
"You two look like you're planning a bank heist," he said, also glancing around as if they were doing something heinous. "What are you talking about?"
"Having a dual wedding in Robin's backyard,"
Alice said. "Next weekend," Kelli added. And Alice swung her head toward her, her eyes wide and filled with shock.
"Next weekend?"
"What are you two waiting for, honestly?" Kelli speared a bite of the chocolate cake and put it in her mouth. She watched Alice and Arthur have a silent conversation, and then she turned to Shad. "Would you marry me next weekend? In Robin's backyard?" "Sure," he said easily. "I can go get my parents on Friday night, fly back with them." He looked at Alice and Arthur. "Are they joining us?"
"This is even more insane than what I proposed to Robin,"
Alice said, but her smile had returned.
"I told her I just wanted to get it done, and then we could eat in the yard and celebrate together."
"Sounds perfect," Kelli said. "I'll order the food if you want."
"Do you even have a dress?"
Alice asked. "No," Kelli said. "I figured I could find something somewhere." Alice started to laugh, and Kelli joined in. She really didn't want anything fancy, and she'd talked to Shad several times about just meeting him in City Hall and tying the knot one afternoon, just the two of them. Then the idea to ask Alice to do a duel ceremony had occurred to her. Seeing Laurel and Paul and their big extravaganza, Kelli did not want that. She'd told Shad that 20 minutes ago while they'd been dancing. "There's Robin," Kelli said. "I'm going to ask her right now."
"Kel,"
Alice said, but she'd already gotten to her feet. She waved at Robin, who came walking over in her professional stride, heels a-clicking against the stone floor.
"What's up?"
She surveyed the table.
"How's the cake?"
"Good, great," Kelli said, not wanting to talk about cake. Her heart raced, and she felt a little out of control. "Alice and I want to get married next weekend."
"Not to each other,"
Alice said quickly.
"but a dual ceremony, in your backyard, like we talked about."
Robin's eyes bulged to the point that Kelli giggled. "What do you think?" she asked. "Alice and I will arrange everything." She met Alice's eye, who nodded. "I'll even send a housekeeper." "I have housekeepers," Eloise said, arriving at the table. "What are we doing with them?"
"Cleaning Robin's house,"
Alice said, popping another bite of cake into her mouth. "For our weddings," Kelli indicated herself and Alice. "Next Sunday. We'll all gather there. We'll get married. We'll eat. It'll be glorious." "Oh, I like this idea," Eloise said, smiling around at everyone.
"Duke is coming home Saturday,"
Robin said, and Kelli saw her wedding in a week plunge toward the earth.
"Then the Sunday after that,"
Alice said, and Kelli whipped her attention right back to Robin. She started to nod slowly.
"The Sunday after that would work."
Kelli jumped to her feet and hugged Robin. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Breathless, she stepped back and added, "We'll take care of everything. Right, Alice?"
"Yep."
she said, reaching for another bite of cake.
"Though, Robin, you might want to help Kelli with a dress. She literally said she could find something somewhere."
Robin turned toward her, a look of pure horror on her face. She snapped her mouth closed and then opened it again to say, "Oh, no, honey, that won't do. We'll go shopping tomorrow. I know just the place that will have something for you."
Chapter 36. Alice stepped into her silky, silver dress, a blip of rebelliousness creeping through her at not wearing a white dress to get married. She'd decided she didn't want to spend much money on this wedding, and that wasn't because she didn't love Arthur with the strength of her whole heart. It was because she did. She didn't need fancy clothes, fancy food, or fancy flowers. She only needed him. And the twins, of course. She'd bought Charlie a new tie to go with his suit, and she'd bought Ginny a new pair of shoes to go with her prom dress from last spring. But Alice had selected her wedding attire from the back of her closet, from the things she hadn't been able to bring herself to throw away after she'd left her life in the Hamptons for this new one on the beaches of Five Island Cove. The old her would literally be stepping into the future as a new woman in her metallic dress and bright white high heels.
"You're dressed already,"
Kelli said as she ducked into Robin's bedroom. "Zip me up," Alice said, grinning at Kelli in the full-length mirror. "I just started, besides." Kelli's chilly fingers slid over Alice's shoulders and then did up her dress.
"This is a gorgeous dress."
"Thanks," Alice said, smiling at herself in the mirror. "I wore it to a fundraising dinner in the city once with Frank." She could remember that night as vividly as if it were yesterday, and it hadn't been a bad night. Frank had actually spoken to her, and they'd danced a few times. She'd stood with a couple of other wives from her neighborhood, and while she wouldn't call them friends in the way Kelli was, it hadn't been a terrible night. She stepped into her shoes and reached for the teardrop diamond earrings she'd put on Robin's dresser. With those on, she declared, "Done," and turned to help Kelli pull her dress over her slip. She wore the traditional white for a wedding, but her dress wasn't frilly or froofy. It would fit through the door just fine, and in fact, it looked a lot like the dresses they'd worn for Laurel's wedding, with lace upon lace, but in white instead of peach. "Did you get this at Judy's?"
Yes,
Kelli said.
they took off the straps to make it a little more formal.
Alice buttoned up the back of it and brushed invisible dust from her bare shoulders. "You're so pretty," she whispered, pressing her cheek to Kelli's. Kelli smiled, and she seemed happy and confident, both things Alice knew she'd struggled with.
Okay, shoes,
Kelli said, her voice wavering slightly.
hand me that box, would you?
Alice handed her the box, and Kelli pulled out a stunning pair of ruby red slippers. They even sparkled with jewels on every surface, and Alice gasped, "Kelli, those are amazing!"
There's no place like home,
she said, putting the shoes on the floor and stepping into them.
Are you sure your dad isn't upset he can't walk you down the aisle?
She tilted her head to the side to put in her earring, a single silver hoop that nearly touched her shoulder. "He's already done it once," Alice said. "He's fine, Kel."
Okay.
Alice faced the door, waiting for Robin to come through it. "She'll come get us when it's time, right?"
Yes,
Kelli said, perching on the edge of the bed.
thanks for doing this with me, Alice.
"Are you kidding?" Alice turned back to her. "This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me." The door opened and Robin poked her head in. "Everyone is sitting down. Mandy's playing the music. She'll switch it when she sees you." She smiled and then committed to entering the room. "Wow. Look at you two." Alice cocked her hip and struck a pose. "Don't we look amazing?" She dissolved into laughter. Robin hugged her and Kelli at the same time, and then Eloise came into the room.
I knew you'd stay and chat,
She said.
Just going to get them real quick, my right eye.
She joined the group hug, and so did AJ, Kristen, and Laurel. They sighed together, the 7 of them, and that only set them all laughing in the next moment. Go on, Robin said, stepping back and causing the huddle to break up. She wiped below her left eye. "You're making me cry, and now dinner is going to be late."
Oh my goodness,
AJ said.
You need to take a chill pill.
"Well, I will once all these blasted weddings are done," Robin sniped back at her. Alice looked at Kelli and they laughed together again. It was usually Alice and Robin trading jabs, but Eloise joined in as the rest of the women left the bedroom. They linked arms, and Alice and Kelli followed them into the kitchen and to the back door. They paused there while their friends took their places up near the altar. There was hardly a front row and a back row, as there were only 4 rows total. Less than 24 chairs, though they were all full. Charlie came to Alice's right side, and Ginny to her left. Parker took Kelli's hand, and they stepped out of the house first. "I love you guys," Alice murmured as Kelli took her trip down the aisle to a waiting, glowing Shadweb.
Love you too, Mom,
Charlie and Ginny said together. Then they stepped toward Arthur, who wore pure joy in his smile. A dozen steps later, her children passed her to him, and he touched his lips to the spot right behind her ear.
You're a stunning bride, Alice.
"Thank you," she murmured, and then they faced the pastor together.
Kelli loved weddings, and there was none better than her own. She listened to the pastor talk about open communication and forgiveness, both things every marriage needed to succeed. He turned slightly toward her and Shad, and her grip on her soon-to-be husband's arm tightened. Her legs had been shaking for the past 10 minutes, and the moment the pastor said, "I guess you two are first," she calmed. Kelli Ann Watkins, do you pledge yourself to Shad Michael Webb, for now and for all eternity, to be his lawfully wedded wife? I do, she said, and she giggled as she met Shad's eyes.
She had never envisioned getting married again, but as the pastor asked him if he'd pledge himself to be her lawfully wedded husband, and Shad said, "I do," Kelli's whole future expanded. What she'd thought would be there vanished, and the entire slate got wiped clean. She could be anyone now, go anywhere, find the joy and happiness and love she'd thought she'd lost when she left New Jersey last year. "I love you," Shad said, and that brought her back to the present, where she wanted to stay. "I love you too," she said. The crowd cheered as they kissed, and Kelli's face heated. She really didn't want the spotlight to shine too brightly on her, and definitely not for too long. Thankfully, there was one more wedding to complete, and the pastor turned to Alice and Arthur to get the job done. Alice's voice barely rose above the slight breeze playing with the leaves in the trees, but Arthur's, "I do," boomed throughout the yard. "Wow, okay," Alice said, laughing. The pastor barely held it together while he pronounced them husband and wife, and then Arthur dipped Alice practically to the ground to kiss her. She squealed, and the crowd did too. Kelli laughed along with everyone else, especially when Alice very nearly toppled to the ground as Arthur tried to get her back to a standing position and almost couldn't manage it. He turned to their small circle of family and friends and raised their joined hands. "I love this woman," he called, and everyone surged forward to give hugs and congratulations. Kelli's mother reached her first, and she said, "This was so perfect, Kel. I think we should do something like this for my wedding at Thanksgiving." "I'm sure we can, Mom." The moment she released her mother, she hugged Shad's mom, who was quite a bit older than her own. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Oh, honey," his mom said. "We wouldn't have missed this for the world. Shad's been looking for someone like you for so long, and he's been talking about you for ages." Kelli pulled back and looked into her watery brown eyes. "He has?" "Oh, yes," she said. "He's so in love with you." "She's not wrong," Shad said, his arm sliding along Kelli's back. "Come on, Mother. The food is out already, and it's time to eat." He escorted both of them into Robin's house, where, sure enough, the food had been laid out, along with all of the fanciest paper goods available. There was no china, no sterling silver, and no bows. But it was the most perfect wedding in the world to Kelli. Laurel watched AJ hustle through the crowd to catch up to Kelli, who hadn't stayed near the altars for very long. Alice still stood there, talking to her dad and stepmom, to Robin's mother, and then stepping over to give Kristen a hug. Baby Asher babbled in Laurel's arms, and she looked down at the infant. "Your mama will be right back," she said. "She just went to tell her best friend congratulations." "Look at you with that baby," Paul said, his eyes full of light. He wrapped them both up in his arms. "We want one of these, don't we?" "You know what?" Laurel asked. "I think I do. And I don't think we have to wait if you don't want to." "No?" He swayed with them, and Asher gah-gah-gahed as he reached for Paul's tie. "No," Laurel said, smiling up at him. "I love you, Paul. You didn't leave my side for a moment when things got really hard, and I think you'll be the best dad in the whole world." He grinned and leaned down to kiss her. "No kissing now," Robin said, and Laurel broke the kiss. She laughed as she tucked herself into Paul's chest. "We're doing the dancing and kissing later." Robin gave her a bright grin as she went by. Duke stuck to her side. "Is that true?" Paul asked. "I don't think Robin jokes about the schedule at a wedding," Laurel said. "I heard that," Robin called over her shoulder. "And she doesn't," Alice said as she approached. "We really are dancing later, and I told Robin I wanted to kiss Arthur while we did. So now she's saying it's the dancing, kissing moment of the wedding." Laurel stepped out of Paul's arms to hug Alice. "You looked better than any bride I've ever seen." "Even Eloise?" Alice whispered, holding Laurel the way she'd always wanted a sister or a friend to hold her. "You and Eloise tied," Laurel said. because if there was someone she loved as much as Alice, it was Eloise. Boo, Alice said, laughing as she pulled away. Don't make me cry, Laurel. Today is a happy day. Mom, Charlie called, and Alice's attention moved to the back entrance of the house.
Mandy can't find the frappe.
It's in the freezer in the garage, Alice called. Come on, you two. We're eating now. Laurel nodded, but she let Alice and Arthur go by, as well as the rest of Alice's and Kelli's families.
They love you, Laurel,
Paul said, as if he knew the doubts and worries in Laurel's mind. I know they do, Laurel said, bouncing little Asher in her arms. AJ came to the back door and said, Laurel, come on. Alice and Kelli want to do toast, but they won't do it without you and Paul. She gestured for them to hurry, and Laurel did finally take the first step out of her row and toward the house. Toward all of the women she loved, who'd welcomed her into their lives, who'd forgiven her, and who'd shown her what it meant to be a true friend. Inside the house, she found everyone gathered around the island in the kitchen, where Kristen lifted her glass first. To the next round of the Seafaring girls, she said. No way, Laurel said. Did they vote on Thursday? Kristen hadn't said anything, but of course they hadn't had a luncheon yet either. They did, Kristen said, and they voted to bring back the program, and they asked me to be the consultant on the board as they organize the program over the next few months. Kristen, that's wonderful! Robin hugged her and raised her glass. Hear, hear! Everyone repeated it, and Laurel picked up a glass of champagne and handed it to Paul before taking one for herself. Any other announcements? Robin asked. We usually do these at our Wednesday lunches. She looked at Duke as she said it. Jean has one, Kristen said, but Jean just shook her head. Laurel's heart went out to the woman, as she didn't possess a mean bone in her body. I'll tell it, Reuben said. We've had a birth mom select our portfolio as the adoptive parents of her baby. She's not due until February, but we're already going over paperwork and we'll be flying to North Carolina to meet her in a few weeks. That's so great, Laurel said, as others gave similar exclamations of joy or congratulations. She lifted her glass again and took another sip. Nothing else? Robin asked. Okay, let's eat. Chapter 1. Alice Rice got up from her desk when she heard the back door open. The twins were home from school, or at least one of them was, as Alice glanced at the bright pink sticky note on her computer. Ginny's working today had been scrawled there in her daughter's handwriting. She smiled at it and tapped it as she went by the computer on the other side of the desk. Charlie? She called as she stepped into the hallway. Down and around the corner into the back of the house showed her that her son had indeed arrived home from school. But he wasn't alone. His girlfriend, Soraya Page, had come with him, and she currently had her fingers fisted in the collar on his jacket, kissing him. Alice cleared her throat, and Soraya and Charlie jumped apart. He looked at her, plenty of panic in his eyes. Hey, Mom. He cleared his throat, too, and she dang near rolled her eyes. Didn't think I'd be home? She folded her arms and glared. Hello, Soraya. Hey, Alice. She hovered half a step behind Charlie. I should go, Charles. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, he said, following her to the garage exit. They didn't kiss again, and the pretty blonde slipped outside. He faced her, his usual devil-may-care expression on his face.
I knew you'd be home.
You seemed surprised.
I'm a little surprised. You don't always come out of your office the moment we get home.
He sighed and opened the fridge.
I don't know what to do about Soraya.
Alice scented blood, and she moved in for the kill. What do you mean? She strode toward him, telling herself to calm down, move slow. Big movements could scare the teenagers away.
I mean, I like her. She's pretty, She's smart.
He closed the fridge and opened the cupboard, obviously trying to do anything he could not to look at Alice.
But she's also going to NYU in the fall, and I'm not.
Ah, I see, Alice said. Charlie had never particularly excelled in academics, except for chemistry. He loved the stuff, and he had applied to Boston University. He'd gotten in, too. No scholarship, no nothing. He'd have to pay for all of it, and Alice had helped him look into getting grants to help fund it. Truth be told, he hadn't even decided if he was going to go or not. She knew one of his New Year's goals was to make a decision for the fall, but only a week into January, and he hadn't done it yet. Alice was trying not to put any pressure on him. A pressured, cornered Charlie usually wasn't a good thing.
Plus,
Charlie said, and he turned his back on her. Alice sat at the bar, ready for anything. Or so she thought.
Mandy and I have been talking again,
He said. And Alice so wasn't ready for that. She almost toppled off her bar stool, she flinched so hard. What? She asked, her voice mostly made of air. Mandy Grover?
Yes.
Charlie pulled down a box of popcorn and turned toward her.
Can I make this?
Sure, she said. Arthur wasn't home from the high school yet, but he loved popcorn as much as Charlie did. Alice was just glad they had something in common, though Arthur got along very well with the twins. He was one of those special breeds of human who actually liked and understood teenagers, and they liked and understood that he just wanted them to be the best they could be. He'd helped Ginny a lot with her college applications, and she'd gotten into NYU, BU, Yale, and Towson. Charlie had only applied to Boston University, and he'd gotten in, so that had spared him from feeling like a failure compared to his sister, something Alice knew he did a lot. And? She prompted. What about Mandy?
I'm thinking. I don't know what I'm thinking.
Alice watched him put the popcorn in the microwave and start it. Her mind whirred like the appliance, and she drew a breath. I think I know what you're thinking.
What's that, Mom?
He finally gave her his full attention, plenty of challenge on his face. He looked so much like his father, but he was much gentler and much kinder. Alice thanked God for that every day. I think you're wishing you didn't have a girlfriend, she said. Then it wouldn't be so confusing to be friends with Mandy. You might even be able to take her to a dance this spring and hang out with her in the summer. Charlie didn't make a face and sigh, which meant Alice was right. He'd never admit it right away, and he simply turned to get out a big bowl for his popcorn. The buttery, salty scent of it started to fill the air, and Alice let the silence fill the spaces between what she'd said.
Maybe.
Charlie said as he opened the microwave and shook the bag of popcorn.
And Mom, you were right about girls.
Which part? Alice got to her feet and approached her son. She curled her hand down the side of his face and around to the back of his head.
They're aggressive,
He said. He shook salt all over the popcorn and looked at her again.
Soraya wants to, do it before we graduate. I told her you'd be home this afternoon, and she still sort of attacked me when we walked in.
Alice narrowed her eyes. She's being aggressive with you?
I mean, I think so,
Charlie said.
Maybe it's just because you've talked to me about sex and girls, and I don't know.
He did a hefty sigh she'd heard before and walked into the living room. Alice stayed in the kitchen, almost afraid to move. His girlfriend wanted to sleep with him and he hadn't done it yet? She wasn't sure if she should rejoice or panic. Usually, the guy had to convince the girl that everything would be okay. Not having that barrier would make everything easier for Charlie. Her stomach churned, and now the popcorn smelled slightly charred instead of delicious and buttery. She turned as the garage door opened again, and this time her husband of 4 months walked in.
Hey, beautiful.
He said, a smile curling the ends of his mouth instantly. He took her into his arms, and Alice pulled on Arthur's strength and stability to use in her own life. Hey, she whispered into his shoulder. He pulled back and looked at her.
Everything okay?
His gaze skimmed further into the house, obviously searching for what had upset Alice. Yes, she said firmly. Everything's fine. Arthur took his briefcase over to the counter that acted as a credenza and said,
Hey, Charlie. How was school?
Great, Arthur, Charlie said, flipping through the channels without looking at his stepfather. Arthur turned back to Alice and she shook her head. Her son was sitting here, bored out of his mind while he tried to find something to watch on TV when he could be with his girlfriend. It wasn't that hard to find somewhere for two teenagers to go, not if they were both properly motivated. Charlie obviously wasn't, and Alice didn't want to disrupt something in the cosmic universe by freaking out about nothing. Yet, she told herself. She didn't have anything to freak out about yet. A week later, Alice hummed to herself as she went around the house, picking up socks, shoes, and dishes. No one seemed to be able to get anything where it belonged except for her. She'd needed a break from her case, a nasty dispute between two parents fighting over their kids, so she didn't mind the clutter that had accumulated this week. She usually made everyone go around on Saturday for a few minutes and help her put the house back together. This week, they'd been busy with Arthur's mother, who didn't have very much time left on this earth. She'd been sick for a while, and Alice would miss her once she finally passed. The silence in the house filled Alice with peace, where it had once struck her with fear. She knew now that no one was going to ring her doorbell and judge her the way they did in the Hamptons. She had no images to protect or uphold here, no pretenses to live up to. She was a busy lawyer who worked from home with two kids who'd graduate from high school in 6 short months, a new husband to dote on, and plenty of household chores to keep her busy. Her phone chimed in her back pocket, one notification after the other, telling her that her friends had started a lively conversation while she'd been in a dead zone picking up plates with dried cheese on them from Ginny's nachos last night. The device continued to sing at Alice until she put all the dirty dishes in the sink and pulled it from her pocket. My goodness, she said, swiping to see what was so important.
I'm dying.
Eloise had sent.
Billy got asked to Sweethearts today. She's 14. Aaron's going to go ballistic. I need all the chocolate I can get to sweeten him up.
Who asked her? Robin had asked immediately. Now that she wasn't swamped with clients, she had more free time to respond to texts quickly. Not that she hadn't before. Her cell phone was practically sewn to her fingers. Alice's was too, so she wasn't judging. She did so much business with her phone, and it was easy to get absorbed into it for long periods of time and not even know it.
A boy named Luke Howard,
Eloise said.
He's a year older than her, and Aaron's not going to like that.
It'll be okay, AJ had said. The Howards live right by us, and they're a good family. Agree with AJ, Robin said. The Howards are good people.
Aaron's looking them up right now,
Laurel sent as Alice watched. She sent a winking emoji, but Alice didn't think she was kidding at all. The chief of police would probably run a background check, call them in for fingerprinting, and do a deep dive into their past going back generations. He had all the resources to do it.
How wonderful for her,
Kristen sent. Jean chimed in with, I can help with a dress if she needs one.
I don't even know if it's formal or not,
Eloise said. It's not formal, Robin said, and she would know. Robin knew everything that happened in the cove, and sometimes she irritated Alice. At the same time, there was no one Alice loved more than Robin Grover. "But it's not casual either," she said. "It'll be best dress, not jeans, not promy." Alice didn't really have anything to add to the conversation, but she tapped out, "It'll be okay, Eloise. He's got a month to get used to the idea, right?"
Good point,
Eloise said.
I just wish they got along better. He's so protective of her. There could be worse things,
Kelli said.
How exciting for her to be asked. How does she know Luke?
The conversation went on from there, but Alice had work to do. She rinsed the dishes and put them in the dishwasher. She wiped down all the counters and the stove. She straightened all the pillows in the living room and took the kitchen trash out to the big, black can Charlie towed out to the street on Thursdays. She started a load of laundry, taking Ginny's clean clothes upstairs to her room. She peeked in the twins' bathroom and frowned. She didn't clean their rooms or do their laundry, but she would come up here to make sure the toilet and tub weren't going to rust through or be stained permanently. Obviously, no one had cleaned this bathroom for a while, and Alice couldn't even remember whose turn it was. The garbage can lid bulged open, and she stepped into the bathroom to collect that. She opened the lid, her hand already reaching for the sides of the bag that had been pulled over the can. She froze, her breath wheezing into her lungs at the sight of the pregnancy test sitting there. It had been used, and it showed only one line: "Not pregnant." Her heartbeat sounded like a bass drum as it banged through her whole body. Whose was this? Her mind raced. Soraya had been over to the house just yesterday, along with the rest of the academic Olympiad team she was on with Charlie. She'd asked to use the bathroom, and since someone else had been in the half bath off the kitchen, she'd gone upstairs. Ginny had a boyfriend, but to Alice's knowledge, they hadn't slept together. She pulled in another breath, and the extra oxygen reminded her of the conversation Charlie had had with her last week about Mandy. They'd been talking and texting again. Alice checked his phone regularly, and Mandy had dropped by 2 or 3 days ago. She'd talked to Charlie and Ginny together on the front porch for about a half hour, left a loaf of chocolate chip banana bread, and gone home. Alice didn't recall her coming in the house. Charlie couldn't be sleeping with her. Could he? She reached for the pregnancy test, dislodging some used makeup remover wipes. In her mind, teenagers were so very stupid because whoever had put this in the trash can should have done a better job of hiding it. Even if it had been under the makeup remover wipes, Alice probably wouldn't have seen it. With the stick in her hand, Alice felt like she was swimming outside of her body. Nothing made sense, and questions formed her whole world. Her feet felt like they were slipping down a muddy slope, and she couldn't catch herself. Bottom line, she needed to know who'd used this pregnancy test. No matter who it was, Alice felt like her whole world was about to change. This has been 4 Weddings and a Baby. Heartwarming friendship fiction. Five Island Cove, Book 6. Written by Jessie Newton, narrated by Jill Smith. Copyright 2021 by AEJ Creative Works. Production copyright by AEJ Creative Works.